Morning. Man, you guys sound like you don't want to be here. Morning. Come on. It's a great day. Okay, this is the hearing. It's called to order. I recognize the presence of a quorum. Committee members. This is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 190-152, 190-153, 190-154, and resolution number 190-164. Mr. Stitt, would you please read the titles of the bills and resolution?
Bill number 190152, an ordinance to adopt the capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2020 through 2025 inclusive. Bill number 190153, an ordinance to adopt the fiscal 2020 capital budget. Bill number 190154, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2020. Resolution number 190164, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2020 through 2024 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2019, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the Authority, pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement, authorized by an ordinance of this Council approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992. Bill number 1563-A, by and between the City and the Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we begin the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2020, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2020 through fiscal 2025. Today we'll hear testimony from the administration on the 5-year plan. The first person to testify, Mr. Stitt, is
Jim Engler.
Jim Engler, all right. Good morning, and if you could just please state your name for the record. Yes, please proceed.
Good morning, Council President Clark and members of City Council. My name is James Engler, Chief of Staff to Mayor Kenny, and I'm here to testify in support of the Mayor's proposed 5-year plan, along with all supporting budget and revenue bills that were proposed on March 7, 2019. I am joined at the table by Rob DeBow, the City's Finance Director, and Anna Adams, the City's Budget Director. Our colleagues representing the various departments of the administration are also here and available to answer your questions. This 5-year plan builds upon our previous investments in long-term strategies that will make Philadelphia a more prosperous, safer, and more equitable city. Thanks to our work during last year's budget process, we are making unprecedented local investments in our public schools, with a total of $1.2 billion over the next 5 years going to the school district and our general fund contribution. This is $700 million higher than the amount that would have been included had we continued our contribution levels in the FY18 through 22 plan. As the Mayor said in his budget address 2 weeks ago, a high-performing public school system is the foundation of what makes any small town or large city great. We are also pleased that the governor's budget adds additional funds in FY20, but as we have previously stated, all Commonwealth funds should flow through the Commonwealth's education funding formula, which would result in an increase of funding for education and, for Philadelphia, and bring our students closer to receiving the critical resources they deserve. With your help, we will continue to work with the Philadelphia delegation to advocate for additional support for our children. Thanks to funds from the Philadelphia beverage tax, PHL pre-K, community schools, and rebuild initiatives are growing in our plan. For rebuild, the administration was able to borrow $86.5 million in the fall, which when combined with the funds included in the capital program and funds received from philanthropic sources, means that recreation centers, playgrounds, libraries, and parks across the city will be renovated and transformed. For PHL pre-K, 2,250 children have access to one of the free high-quality slots this year, and in FY23, the slots will have doubled, with 5,500 3- and 4-year-old children able to participate annually. Slots are not the only item funded thanks to revenues received from the beverage tax. Providers have access to support specifically targeted at improving the quality of facilities and in-class instruction. These supports include teacher coaching, common curriculum, facility improvements, and many other services that will help build a high-quality early childhood system in our city. Our focus on the system has already paid off. Through the first 2.5 years of PHL pre-K, 35 providers have significantly improved their quality according to the Keystone Stars rating system, resulting in not just improved quality for the over 800 PHL pre-K students at those centers, but also the 1,000 other students enrolled in those centers. This improvement will be felt for decades to come as these students are more prepared to transition to kindergarten and beyond. And our community schools are having a significant impact on the communities that they serve. The data has shown that students attending community school have better attendance than their peers, and we are excited to add 5 additional schools in FY20 and 3 more in FY21 for a total of 20 schools. These schools provide out-of-school time programming during the school year and summer break, ensuring that our kids are safe and learning 12 months of the year. The FY20 budget grows by $191.6 million over the current estimate for FY19. Much of this is for our fixed cost. Increased costs for disposal within the streets department due to the global market conditions affecting recycling, $30 million in increased costs for pensions, increases due to labor agreements with our unionized workforce, an increased estimate of employee disability, and corresponding expenditures for health department revenues. Pension costs account for about $3.9 billion of costs in the 5-year plan, and together with the reforms that have been made through collective bargaining, and based on our actuaries' analysis, will allow us to reach 80% funded status by FY29 and 100% funded status by FY33. The increased contribution to the school district, as previously mentioned, also accounts for $33 million of the increase. The expansion of PHL pre-K and community schools also increases projected spending by $16.1 million. As we all know, our needs are great and our resources are limited. We are making strides, however, and for the first time, we can include funds for the Budget Stabilization Reserve, or Rainy Day Fund, within the proposed budget. In FY20, $34.1 million will be included as a cushion against another severe recession. In FY24, our fund balance projection meets the 3% obligation threshold, which would trigger another contribution of $37.9 million. While these additions are important, we must also build a stronger fund balance and remain cautious about state and federal funds. Our fund balances, while improved from prior years, remain lower than government finance experts recommend and lower than our internal goal of 6 to 8% of obligations. We have included approximately $55 million in a federal funding reserve as the threats from federal and state governments remain. Our administration looks to balance the need to bring stability to the city's finances so that residents and taxpayers can continue to rely on the services that they utilize, with a critical need to make short and long-term investments to improve our city. Our budget proposal, therefore, makes careful and crucial investments in 3 areas of focus: safety and justice, inclusive growth, and quality government services. I will address the main investments for each. Ensuring the safety of all those who live, work, and spend time in Philadelphia has been a key priority of our administration. Last year's 5-year plan included $100 million to allow our police department to increase the number of general fund sworn officers to 6,525. And our proposed 5-year plan adds an additional $3 million in annual funding to grow the force to 6,575. To increase transparency and build public trust, we added funding to support the purchase of body-worn cameras and to accelerate the police department's ability to outfit all police officers and operations by 2021. This budget proposes funding to purchase nearly 1,500 additional body-worn cameras. In the fire department, we have hired more firefighters and paramedics, restored battalions, and added an alternative response unit. Our proposed 5-year plan builds upon these investments, adding $28.4 million in operating budget funding to support the reopening of 7 engine and ladder companies over the next 5 years that were closed during the Great Recession, and adding 5 additional medic units in FY20 to support the increased demand faced by firefighters, EMTs, and paramedics within the EMS system. The 6-year capital program and 5-year plan also include significant investments in public safety infrastructure. The capital budget proposes funding of $90 million in new general obligation debt, alongside operating revenue capital funds to support the construction and outfitting of new and renovated police facilities. In response to the mayor's urgent call to action to address violence in the city, the managing director's office released the Philadelphia Roadmap to Safer Communities, a comprehensive strategy that focuses on prevention, intervention, enforcement, and reentry to reduce violence and gun-related crime. The FY20 through 24 plan includes $31.5 million in additional funding to support the implementation of this strategy. Recognize the importance of programs that connect and engage youth, young adults, and families impacted by violence in their communities. The plan supports growth of 3 initiatives managed by the Office of Violence Prevention: expanding the Community Crisis Intervention Program, expanding the Youth Violence Reduction Partnership, and increasing support for grants for community groups on the front lines of neighborhood violence. To enable the police department to better use data and analytics to target city neighborhoods experiencing the highest rates of gun violence, the plan includes $7.2 million over 5 years for Operation Pinpoint, a multifaceted crime-fighting and information-sharing strategy. To reduce blight and improve environmental factors in high-risk neighborhoods, the plan provides $6.3 million to the Department of Licenses and Inspection for cleaning and greening lots using proven models to reduce crime, demolishing unsafe structures, and stabilizing vacant buildings. Finally, the plan adds $11.8 million to pilot 2 full and 2 satellite neighborhood resource centers over the next 5 years. These neighborhood-based hubs will provide people who are under county supervision with access to a broad range of services to support reintegration, restoration, and wellness, and will support the goals and continued success of the administration's MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge. Additionally, Philadelphians continue to experience the devastating impact of the opioid epidemic. The FY20 through 24 five-year plan proposes continued investments to combat this epidemic by providing additional funding for the Philadelphia Resilience Project, the citywide emergency response focused on Kensington and surrounding neighborhoods at the epicenter of the crisis. The plan adds $26.3 million over 5 years to the Office of Homeless Services budget to provide the emergency, temporary, and long-term housing needed to reduce the number of people who are unsheltered. Since the beginning of the Kenney administration, more than 200 new beds have been added through the city's shelter system. Even more importantly, over 600 chronically homeless people who would otherwise be on the street are now in permanent housing and not shelters. Additional funding of $600,000 over the next 5 years is provided to the Department of Public Health for a toxicologist in the medical examiner's office, and $6.5 million over 5 years is provided to the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability for outreach, recovery housing, and supports for expanded syringe exchanges. Within the Managing Director's office, funding has been added to support neighborhood cleanups and safe routes to schools. Our administration and its criminal justice partners have also made significant progress implementing reforms and decreasing the jail population by approximately 42% from 2015 levels. Grant funding provided through the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge has supported this work. In October 2018, Philadelphia was awarded a second 2-year grant of $4 million from the MacArthur Foundation. The FY20 through 24 plan provides local match funding for the second phase of the grant, enabling the administration and its criminal justice partners to continue safely reducing the jail population and reducing racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Due to the collaborative efforts of the city's criminal justice partners, the inmate census is projected to average 4,500 in this 5-year plan, resulting in an annual budgetary savings of $10 million. The plan includes funding to continue the expansion of a successful program originally piloted through the MacArthur Grant, the Police-Assisted Diversion Program, a pre-booking diversion program that connects individuals who have come into contact with law enforcement for low-level offenses to harm reduction services in lieu of arrest. Increased funding is also proposed for Mural Arts Guild reentry program so that more returning citizens can participate in a paid 4-month pre-apprenticeship program and receive job placement support after the program ends. For the past 2 years, Philadelphia has outpaced the national average on job growth. However, for too many Philadelphians, this improved economy has not resulted in access to family-sustaining jobs. While the average household income has increased 22.2% over the last decade, 25.7% of Philadelphians remain at or below the poverty line, with 14% living in deep poverty. Our administration's vision for Philadelphia is that the city will have a strong and growing economy that benefits everyone. To improve early literacy and provide more quality programming for children outside of school hours, the plan includes an additional investment in out-of-school time programming, along with the infrastructure needed to manage and continually evaluate this work. With an additional $1 million annually, the administration will also support summer jobs for youth in the city, providing meaningful opportunities to serve more Philadelphia youth through Work Ready. To support teenagers and young adults in their education and career preparedness, the plan supports an Office of Career-Connected Education, a joint venture between the city and school district. The office will connect school-age youth in 7th grade and older to work-based learning experiences of increasing depth and complexity to master skills employers are seeking. The plan...
Summarize.
Sure.
You know.
There's a lot of good stuff in here.
I know. We have 2 months to figure it out.
You will.
I appreciate you.
So I'll go to the conclusion. So the city's revenue outlook over the next 5 years projects growth in all our tax revenues, but at a slower pace than we have experienced over the last several years following national trends. It's only 2 paragraphs. Building a stronger fund balance, protecting against federal and state cuts, adding funds into a rainy day fund, as well as investing in all these short and long-term strategies will help Philadelphia grow, continue to support our most vulnerable, strengthen our families and communities, and provide stability across all of our services. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and we look forward to working with all members of council throughout this budget process. All of us here representing the administration are available to answer the questions that you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Engler. Appreciate you. We'll get right into it. Got a couple of quick questions. Been known to be, myself and Rob, they're both kind of like fiscally prudent, fiscal moderate. Some people say fiscal conservative. Just personally, we don't have to spend money, don't spend money. But we're at like $5 billion in our city's budget. And I can remember a time when the goal was to get us like under 4. I think during another administration, we were at like 4.1 or something. Can you talk to me about why we're at $5 billion? And this is either Mr. Engler or whoever is the...
There are a couple of specific areas that have driven our costs up, and ones that we've put a lot of focus on over the last couple of years. One is pensions. If you look at what's happened with pensions since we were at $4 billion, that's gone up by about $120 million.
Right.
There's the contribution to the school district, which has gone up by about $100 million, and as you know, that was offset in part by revenue, so there was a conscious decision there. Other employee benefits have gone up about $100 million. And then there are the reserves, which are important for our fiscal health. Those are about $100 million, so almost half of the increase is just in those 4 areas. And then there are investments, other investments like in pre-K that weren't there 4 or 5 years ago. That's about another $50 million.
So it's being offset to some degree by additional revenues,
by revenues,
soda tax, i.e. contributions.
Yes, and some of these are about long-term investments to ensure the fiscal health of the city, to ensure the growth of the city. Right. Some of these are anti-poverty initiatives. So there are a number of reasons for the increases.
So what's the impact on the taxpayer? Because at the end of the day, it's about the taxpayer and us being able to reduce the burden on the taxpayer, if at all possible.
Yeah, I think in the long term, it's all for the benefit of the taxpayer. In improving the health of the city, improving the competitiveness of the city. These are all kind of things that are crucial in the long term, and all the things we have done contribute to that.
What about the short term, when they have to pay the tax bill?
I would also add that a lot of these investments were really deferred from previous years, especially during the recession. There were deep cuts made to multiple departments, including departments like the fire department. So the investments that we're making this year, adding additional medic units, the investments we're making over the 5-year plan, adding engine companies and ladder companies, investments that we're making in our street infrastructure. When this administration started, there was 1 paving crew for the streets department. This plan will add a 3rd paving crew so that we can get to that 131 miles of paving annually, which the streets department says is the state of good repair. So all of those investments are really about kind of things were deferred from the past, and we know that we need to make in order to have a city that taxpayers can be comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, we get a lot of concerns about the conditions of our streets, so it's good to see that we're going to do something on that. So you talk about overtime. In the last quarterly report, projects that overtime for FY19 will be over budgeted by approximately $24 million, and further overtime is projected in FY19 at the same expenditure. Given that the employment levels overall for the city have increased based on the November 2018 incremental run, why isn't overtime expenditures decreasing at a proportional rate? Because with this ongoing issue with overtime continues to be
So I think that report also showed that overtime was down year over year and down as a % of payroll. So we've put increased focus on making sure that we control overtime, and that report actually showed that it's starting to pay off. The managing director's office and budget have been working with departments to ensure that they report every quarter on what's going on with overtime and talk about any variances and what's causing them.
Say that again.
From the beginning or just the last part?
No, I want you to say that again, because I didn't see a real. All right, say it again, please.
So if you looked at the last Piker report on overtime, it's shown that overtime is actually down from prior year, from 18 to 19, and down as a % of payroll. So there's been progress, and it's an area where there's been increased focus from managing director's office and budget. They've been working with departments to get regular updates on overtime, to see what overtime is doing against budget, and to get explanations for any variances.
All right. Okay. One is kind of like the council person's. On your capital expenditures, proposed capital funding for commercial corridors, what are we going to do on that? It doesn't appear that the operating budget supports our commercial corridors, and the question is, how much in a total spend is allocated for commercial corridors in the 5-year plan? And if you can just detail how the commercial corridor spending will be allocated by neighborhood, because there's an issue about that. Are we going to continue at the same rate, or are we increasing our capital expenditures on commercial corridors. And
So-
then I have a follow-up question about Amazon. Let's see my friend make his way up towards the table.
So I'll let the Commerce Director talk more specifically about the allocation among different corridors, but if you remember, we did some pay-as-you-go capital financing and we included commercial corridors in FY19, so we added $2.5 million during that process in FY19, which meant that we didn't have to borrow for FY20. So you can see that's why in the FY20 budget, we don't show any needed GO bonds being used because we just did that additional $2.5 million in FY19. And then throughout the capital program, we added another $2.5 million, assuming that that's all spent. So we're keeping that $2.5 million for commercial corridors in the capital program.
So you're saying that we'll be using back allocations, prior allocations?
So Council, just in the fall.
Because sometimes when you don't spend money.
That's right.
And you roll it over.
That's right.
That doesn't mean that it's good. It means that you didn't spend the money that you were supposed to spend in the prior years.
So I'll let the Commerce Director talk about their carry forward, but just to understand what's included in the budget, we're making sure that they have enough to be able to ensure that those projects continue throughout the capital program and keeping that funding steady.
Okay.
So the Harold Epps, Director of Commerce. So on the capital side, the capital projects that are already in progress, there is enough money there to finish them. And we have an annual review process with finance to ensure that there is further money allocated to the projects that get approved going forward. So right now we're okay to finish the projects that are in progress. Yeah, unfortunately, those projects take longer than anybody would like from beginning to end, but they are in progress.
Well, is there a way, or are we looking at accelerating the capital projects? I mean, you know, we looked at, I know, on rec centers and some of the other, you know, much needed issues, a way to accelerate capital expenditures on the commercial corridors. If we're allocating dollars, projecting to do so many corridors, I know a number of us were interested in corridors, particularly district council person, and it seems that we don't get there in a timely way. Is there a specific reason for that, or a reason that's correctable? Well, so we don't allocate money and then we say, well, we're not going to put any new money in, which we're not doing this year, because we already have back money that we didn't spend, but that's not really addressing the underlying need for commercial corridor expenditures.
The answer to the expediting process is one that we also don't like, and that is it would need to be done outside of the constraints of the process of government. Some of the policies and procedures and guidelines that are required for us to follow put time into those that another process would not require. And we opt not to take it outside the government because it brings another set of issues that none of us are comfortable with.
Are there legal restraints or restraints that we cannot overcome or change the regs associated with that?
We have not done those to date.
You what?
We have not changed them to date. So yes, there are policies and procedures and legal constraints that we are required to follow by law.
Well, can we look at that?
We can.
I'm just saying. I mean,
yes, we could look at that.
You know, if we had the money, let's spend it. I mean, people.
We 100% agree with you. We'd like to do it faster.
Okay. When we have callbacks, do you think you'll be in a position to give us some recommendations on that?
We can do that.
I appreciate that. How much time am I? Am I over my time? Some time ago, huh? Okay. All right. We're gonna start with the members. Thank you, Mr. Epps. Oh well, one last, the Amazon issue. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's actually a relatively easy one. So Amazon, they did their thing.
Yes.
New York, whatever. A couple colleagues from up in New York ran them out of there, according to them. Anyway, bottom line is we did a lot of work, some of it that we weren't aware of, but I know there was a lot of work done to attract Amazon to some sites that obviously were attractive because we did make the final 20.
Yes.
What's our strategy in terms of attracting some additional or similar or nothing? Nobody's obviously comparable to Amazon, but in, I guess, a step down, Amazon minus B or whatever, to come to those particular locations. So we have a strategy since we have this all teed up.
We do. So we have a multitude of activity going on, including a Brookings process of branding that will allow us to further define our assets and make those assets packaged in a way that would make them attractive to entities. The way I would like to say it is, even post-Amazon, we are hitting singles and doubles and getting new companies to Philadelphia. I'll give you one stat that I know for sure, and that is year over year, there are 10 new companies at the Navy Yard. Some of those are there as a result of the visibility of Philadelphia being heightened through the Amazon process. There are other companies that have come to the Schuylkill River. When those companies come, they typically are from 20 to 200 companies. They don't make the front page of the newspaper, but again, when Mr. Engler talks about our growth rate being greater than the national average, that's a result of Philadelphia being heightened its visibility and the Amazon process having a lot to do with that. We were done a big favor as a result of that process. We have a much better package story, and it will be even better a year from now. A lot of good work is taking place. The First Deputy, Sylvia Gallier Howard, is leading a comprehensive team around the city of all externally facing stakeholders to further package the story of Philadelphia, and by fall we'll have a much better comprehensive story to tell that will make Philadelphia even more attractive.
Okay.
I am very confident that you will continue to see very aggressive growth coming out of job creation.
Okay, real quick, one last promise. Related to that, can you, when you come back for your, when we do recalls for the other thing, can you give us a sense of the strategy associated with the skills mismatch? Because we've just rolled out this recent poverty initiative, anti-poverty initiative. The biggest challenge with Philadelphians is the skills mismatch. So can you be prepared to talk and concurrent to that solicitation process of bringing companies into these locations, making sure that our people are trained to be available for those jobs?
And I'll give you the headline right now. Right now, Philadelphia is in the 4th quartile on 2- and 4-year degree attainment rate. Ours is 37%. Right. Every city that we compete against is 55% and greater.
Okay.
So the workforce development initiative that is so critical to this administration, all the investment in the schools, is we got a long-term plug to get the citizens born in Philadelphia trained to do those jobs. And this is an increasing knowledge economy. It will only increase. We must get our 2- and 4-year degree attainment rate up as fast as possible.
Okay. If you can just send us the specifics of that in the interim.
You can tell me you want a little bit of data, a minute of data, or I can fill this room with data.
Fill the room.
All right.
Yeah, fill the room.
Not a problem.
Yeah, no,
be careful what you wish for.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Councilman Jones, we're going to start out with like 7, 8 minutes. 7 minutes. All right. Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. 7 minutes is more than enough.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, everyone, and
Good morning.
Thank you for once again presenting the case to the public. I want to focus on very quickly the fact that since 2013 to now, the city has steadily chipped away at the amount of delinquency due to the city of Philadelphia in real estate. And according to your testimony, we're at 95% collection. Is that accurate?
Gee, we're a little over 96%. It's collected on time.
So that'll make my colleague, Councilman Dom, very happy.
It makes us all very happy.
It makes us all very happy. The second thing I would ask is that we have a $368 million fund balance. And I think that's the highest in the city's history. Is that right?
I believe that's true.
And what I want to ask then, and I want to thank Director Epps. He has made a number of commercial corridor tours in my district, in the 4th district, from Main Street to Market Street, checking on things. And I really appreciate that effort and wanted to put that on the record. So thank you very much for that. So, which taxes have performed beyond expectation? Which taxes have fallen below expectation? And my wind-up question is it time to take a look at the 10-year tax abatement to look at its future for Philadelphia?
So I'll answer the tax question in terms of how the taxes have performed. We saw some really strong growth in our transfer tax, particularly in the commercial real estate market. So that one, if you know, when we get some big downtown buildings that sell for large amounts, that has a really positive impact on our transfer tax. And so our transfer tax sort of exceeded pre-recession levels, which is a really good thing. Our wage tax continues to grow. I know that the Commerce Director mentioned our strong jobs growth, and we're also starting, hopefully seeing we saw the wage growth also growing with that. And overall, our taxes have slightly outperformed what we had anticipated leading up to that $368 million fund balance in FY18. And then we project that growth continues into FY19, and then over the 5-year plan, we continue to show growth, but a much slower rate as kind of the national economy generally cools. We start seeing kind of our growth rate, instead of being in the 3 to 4% range, can vary in sort of the 1 to 2% range. But we are continuing to grow as a city.
And then to your question on the abatement, Councilman, as you know, we did a study last year with Jones Lang LaSalle looking at various ways that the abatement could be tweaked or what would happen if it were to be eliminated. I think we saw from that study that over the long term, the benefits of the abatement kind of outweigh the negative impacts of it. But I think understanding it from a question of fairness, which I think is one thing that this chamber is always focused on, whether this program is the right program to carry us into the future. I think there's at least 4 different proposals in the chamber now to consider changes to the abatement. We are happy to be part of that discussion. But I think we also want it to be driven by data. So there was data released by HUD a couple weeks ago that showed that development starts, permit data, Philadelphia was really at the bottom of a lot of our peer cities. I mean, trailing places like Columbus, Ohio, when it comes to development starts and permit data. So I think taking all of that into account, I think looking at it from a perspective of fairness and what's really fair for long-term residents, as well as helping us attract not only new residents but also businesses into the city, we're happy to be part of that discussion.
So I guess what I want to say is we've been at this a while now, and its impacts are obvious by way of the skyline, but also the unintended consequence, I believe, is gentrification, overdevelopment, and things like that. And so in that discussion about the future of a 10-year tax abatement, one size doesn't fit all. And is it geography-based? Are we looking at that? And as these abatements come offline, what has been the experience with the new revenue that comes with that? And how is that making up for revenues? Have we kind of dug down, took a deeper dive into that analysis?
Sure. So we have that data specifically, and what we talked about in the fall was appropriating all of that new revenue that comes in from previously abated properties in the first year that it comes in to the Housing Trust Fund. So over 6 years, from FY19 through 24, we're projecting a little over $80 million into the Housing Trust Fund to specifically support the work of the Housing Action Plan. So whether that's support for first-time home buyers, the shallow rent subsidy that we've been talking about, all of those programs associated with the Housing Action Plan, that funding will go directly towards that. So that's the revenue that is coming in from the abatement over the next, really starting this year and over the next 5 years, that we'll be dedicating to that, because we know that no matter what action we take to either change the abatement, end the abatement, whatever end result we have, over the next 10 years, we have these properties that are coming off the abatement, and we can direct that revenue to significantly impact the negative consequences that gentrification may have caused.
So this question is for Ms. Betsy, who I know is watching. Is it true that a lot of people who have applied for the tax abatement, they ride it out, and then in the 7th, 8th, maybe even 9th year, sell it, and someone else gets a new one?
I don't know that we know that for certain. We're happy to look at the data and try and get you a report on what happens with that property in the 7th, 8th, and 9th year, whether it's being transferred, whether the original tenant decides to stay in the property. We'll probably take a deeper dive in some of the data and look at it.
And we haven't seen any evidence. We haven't seen any evidence of that in the data, but we can double check.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Greenlee.
Good morning. Couple of quick ones here. In the fire department issue, you say about the reopening of 7 engine and ladder companies. Is that the total that was closed, or is there still others that either are still closed or won't be open, or do we know?
I don't have that data in front of me, but we can tell you this is related to the SAFER grant. As part of the SAFER grant, we committed to opening these 7 companies. I mean, we could go back in Philadelphia's history about exactly when companies were closed, and so we can look through that. But these are the ones that the fire department have focused on reopening.
Okay, because I'm particularly thinking there was that one time where a number of them were closed, and I'm just wondering if that covers that, or there was more closed. I can't remember the number.
We'll get back to you on that.
Okay. All right, thank you. And Rob, you can probably answer this. I think I know the answer. On OPA, is the money that is being proposed, I know you said it's dealing a lot with the consultant's report. I think CAMA, is that already totally paid for? Is that, we're done on that?
It is. The CAMA system is included in the budget, and it's on schedule to begin going live in a year.
In a year, okay. Because I know we keep hearing that that's going to be one of the things we really need to do. So,
yes.
Okay, great. And finally, on the streets department, Mr. Engel, I know we mentioned how we hear a lot from people about the condition of the streets. And I don't know if there's an answer to this right now, or maybe it's when the streets department comes in, but I just want to add the other concern that we heard a lot. I know the council president heard from this from people in my area, is how long the process takes once a street is milled to the final product. And I'm hoping that when that's all worked out to do additional paving, which is a great, we all support, that there is some attention paid to that whole issue of being a little bit more short-term in how long it takes, because we probably heard as much complaints about the time that it took than we did about the condition of the streets. Now, I don't know if there's anybody from streets that can answer that right now, or we can talk about it when they come in for our
Yeah, I think the commissioner is on his way up. I would say that I know the department focuses on specific geographic areas, so
Right.
that it shouldn't take that long, because they want to have all the machinery in one place and be able to
Right.
move it quickly from street to street in order to be able to do the milling and then go back and do the manhole covers and then
Yeah.
to do the resurfacing. But the commissioners can speak more specifically.
Okay. Morning, Commissioner.
Good morning, Councilman Greeley. My name is Carlton Williams, Streets Commissioner for the City of Philadelphia. Yes, we certainly did experience some issues last year, especially in Francisville. I did receive a number of your calls and concerns from concerned residents. This year, we increased the contract requirements, and we've improved enforcement methods, which we will hold contractors accountable. The process normally takes 3 weeks from milling to paving. We've decreased that number and to set an expectation of 10 days. And ultimately, we want to make sure that contractors are held accountable. If, in fact, they don't meet that deadline, then they can be fined as much as up to $10,000 if they ultimately cause major delays. And so we believe that this was the best method for us to create enforcement rather than going through an ordinance, as we originally had discussed.
Right.
We think the contract provisions that we put in this year will be sufficient to address our contractors who delay the process and cause these inconveniences in our community.
So just so I'm clear, 10 days from beginning to end, is that what you're?
10 days from the time milling starts to when we begin paving. So
Okay,
the whole
begin
process
paving.
should take anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks. But the delays that we experienced last year and the problems that we encountered was the fact that those streets weren't being turned over fast enough to the department in order for us to begin the paving process through the adjustments. So we've corrected that this year. We've
Okay.
put in stricter provisions for us to be able to address that.
Okay, that sounds good, because last year was, some of those, it was a long time those streets sat, as
Yes,
we know,
sir.
because you and I talked about that a few times.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Council President. I just have some questions regarding the proposed $200 million Streets Department budget. So how much is going toward paving? How much is going toward other areas?
So specifically that 200 million, are you referring to the amount in the capital program? So the amount in the capital program is going to one specific line item in the capital program for street resurfacing. I think the commissioner can talk in more detail about kind of how that money works out, but that's just for resurfacing of streets.
Just for resurfacing, 200 million?
That's right. I think it's just a little over 200 million over the 6-year capital program.
Hey, Councilman, how you doing?
How you doing?
Carlton Williams, Streets Department again. Yes, that's for over the next 5-year period. The $200 million covers the materials and the increased budget to add that third paving crew to get us to a state of good repair of 131 miles. Over the years, we've steadily begun to increase. We went from 77 miles in 2017 to 95 miles actually this year, and we expect to gradually increase and ramp up those efforts up to 131 miles. And we believe that this will at least stabilize our city streets, and so we don't have to clear over 67,000 potholes as we've done last year, which was the highest that we've ever completed. And then you'll start to see that gradual change in improvements to our street conditions and some of the complaints and problems that we've receiving over the last year. This will take some time for us to get there. Obviously, it's not going to be an overnight, but you'll start to see those improvements very soon.
Okay, so how much will be allotted, separate from the 200 million, specifically for sanitation? You know, one, I want to commend, first I want to commend you for the record, Carlton, first and foremost. I probably call you, Dave Perry, Keith Warren more than anyone else in terms of maybe Commissioner Ross, but I call you guys on a regular, specifically around the issue of illegal dumping, trash and litter throughout the 2nd Councilmanic District. And so I want to acknowledge the work of Keith Warren for always being responsive.
Thank you.
But we're in a crisis when it comes to the issue of illegal dumping here in the city of Philadelphia. We're in a crisis when it comes to the issue of trash and litter. So I know we have a street sweeping program pilot that we're going to roll out that I wholeheartedly support. I believe if we can move our cars for block parties, then we should move our cars to have our streets clean. Just for the record. And so, can you elaborate on what neighborhoods will participate in the pilot street sweeping program as we move forward, and also the portion and the amount in the budget that's going to specifically go toward sanitation, but also our strategy and methods of addressing the issue of illegal dumping. I recently talked to the District Attorney Krasner, and I was just also updated by Chief of Staff for the Mayor, Jim Engler. They're also having conversations with Krasner at making sure we look at this issue from a criminal standpoint. Because I think for all the hard work that we do as a city, cleaning up these illegal dump sites, right? Cleaning up piles of trash, piles of tires, and we're getting complaints from our constituents, and then only to come out the next day or 2 days later for me to send you another text message or email saying we have another pile of tires, another lot filled with debris. Makes all that work that we're doing for nothing. So we want to take it to the next level and really hold people accountable. Like if you catch a person, a contractor more specifically, who is engaging in illegal dumping, I don't think that they should be allowed to do business with the city of Philadelphia no more ever. Like, period. And so just give us an overview on your strategy and the amount of the budget that's going to be prioritized to go in that area. And even if we need more support to actually fund sanitation, but specifically around illegal dumping, trash, and litter, and also what the street sweeping program will look like in the future.
Sure. I'll first address what the administration put in this year for mechanical street sweeping. $2.3 million will be designated to a mechanical street sweeping pilot in various neighborhoods based on a litter index that we created and we've been doing for the last couple of years to identify the most affected areas. The mechanical sweeping program will come with additional brooms and additional laborers to assist with a thorough, detailed cleaning of a corridor in a certain area in the neighborhood. The reason why we need those laborers, mechanical sweeping does a good job of catching curbside litter. Ultimately, litter doesn't just reside on the curbside and gutters. It's in vacant lots, it's on sidewalks, and it's usually generated in those areas. So it doesn't make sense for us just to clean the street and leave the rest of the street a mess. And so our job is to try to do a thorough and complete job. They'll be equipped with backpack blowers. blowers. For those, we're going to encourage people to move cars. We certainly believe that people should move cars, but throughout this pilot, when they don't move, we still should not leave a street in a condition that is not presentable. So they'll be using backpack blowers to actually force trash into the street where mechanical brooms can do an effective and thorough job when they can't get curbside. In addition, they'll be cleaning up those piles. A lot of the litter that we're seeing is garbage bags and construction debris and all of those other smaller items that, larger items that mechanical brooms cannot pick up. But we want to make sure that we do a thorough job when we go through those areas. So our mechanical cleaning program will be focused in certain neighborhoods. We'll be doing an announcement very shortly in the neighborhoods that are affected. And so we don't want to prematurely address that, but we'll share that with you very shortly. Moving on to illegal dumping, you're right. Illegal dumping is probably our biggest problem to catch and to prevent in the first place. And we've made an investment this year into the camera system. You and I have had this discussion, and it's been very effective. We started off in certain areas in North Philadelphia, 9th in Ontario, and Rising Sun in Venango. Literally has stopped the dumping in those areas.
How are we monitoring those cameras?
We have staff, dedicated sweep officers that will be dedicated in districts throughout the city of Philadelphia, identifying and performing investigations on those who dump. Also, earlier...
Is that a 24-hour process?
No, it's an 8-hour process, but it has the capability of going back to record. So, for example, if we monitor it throughout the regular workday, and then the next day we see an area that's been dumped on, we have the capability of going back and pinpointing that area, getting license plates, identification of people who are actually dumping in those areas, to then turn over to one of the things that I wanted to talk about is our partnership through the Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet. We have an environmental detective now who is actually prosecuting those cases. So therefore, when we get the information, in the past, there wasn't a focused or a formal process for us to turn these cases over to the police department who can then prosecute. We now have that process in place, and the fines have been increased, and so we can hold people more accountable. And so those cameras are being used as an effective tool, not only to catch dumpers, but actually prevent it from happening in the first place, which is where we want to be.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and hello to each of you. I want to go back to the line of questioning that Councilman Jones opened up with relative to our real estate taxes. Here, we are projecting $713 million as the total amount to be collected, $713 million. Would you be able to tell us how much of that is from residential and how much is that from commercial?
We can get back to you with an estimate of that. We don't have it here, but we'll get back to you with that.
Extremely important. In addition to that, we would really like to know where. So if it's residential, and I think this is information that was compiled for us in prior years, but to see exactly where by council districts the residential taxes are coming from, right? So who's paying? In addition to that, help us see the delinquency. So we start a series of budget briefings and town hall meetings, and you'd be surprised how pleased people are when they get to see that their community is contributing to this tax base and that they're paying their fair share. But it also forces them to say, we're gonna hold the city accountable. When we contribute, we deserve a return on our investment. So please forward that information to us. The next question is relative to our pension fund. Extremely pleased with the laser-like focus this administration has had on improving the health of the pension fund, working with our unions. I think we're on a path to shore up the fund. I was happy to see that you now project the fund to be 80% funded by FY2020. And I think that if my memory serves me correctly, did you move it up 1 year? Was it like FY30 and 100% funded by FY33? Talk about that and how did we get there?
Yes, we did move it up by 1 year. And as you said, it's been a true partnership. So part of it was the changes that we got through collective bargaining. For our non-uniformed employees, they've gone into the stack hybrid, and they've increased contributions. Uniformed employees have increased contributions, so that has helped both decrease the growth of our liabilities and increase our assets. We also put more money in each year. We've gone to something we call the revenue recognition policy, which means we put more money into the plan that's required by state law. And some of that has actually been built into collective bargaining agreements. The sales tax money that you helped to make sure went to pensions has been really, really helpful. Thank you again for that.
Mr. President, did you hear that, Mr. President? Okay.
Yes. I heard it.
The board itself has changed the way it invests so that our investment costs have gone down dramatically and our earnings have actually improved. And council has helped with legislation that you've passed. So it's been a number of things, and it has really helped with the health of the pension fund for the long term.
Thank you. I really wanted you to get that on the record because Lord knows when we get it wrong, everybody in the world lets us know that we got it wrong, but we're finally getting it right. And our pension fund has outperformed some of even the state systems. And so you all have done an outstanding job there. I also want to just quickly talk about this commercial corridor cleaning. On January the 16th, Plan Philly published an article, PPA makes millions ticketing drivers for blocking street sweepers that rarely show up. A team of reporters surveyed several commercial corridors for 2 weeks, found that Streets Department didn't show up. For me, Rising Sun Avenue was the corridor in the 9th Councilmatic District where they started beating my door down. I want to, for the record, commend Commissioner for responding. It was a tough story, and we got beat up bad, and when we're getting beat up, then we call you in a frenzy, trying to figure out how do we fix it. So for the people on Rising Sun Avenue who I'm sure are paying attention, talk about what we've done to remedy that.
Yeah. So thank you, Councilwoman. Carlton Williams, Streets Commissioner. Yes, that was certainly an unfortunate situation that we had to address. One of the things that we found is that normally when we have mechanical failure of a mechanical broom, we needed to communicate that to PPAs to ensure that those tickets would not be issued on days that we weren't cleaning. And so we've improved that process by working with PPA. Sometimes we also get called for emergencies, water main breaks, leaf collection issues that we have to address and divert resources. And I think the breakdown was that there wasn't a strong communication tool between our department and PPA to notify them. And so since that time, we're working on rectifying that situation in terms of us making daily counts and daily calls to PPA to let them know if we have issues on certain routes, and therefore people will not get ticketed when we're not able to clean. I think the most discouraging part was that people would move their car or receive a ticket, and then the cleaning didn't take place. And so we're addressing that situation with PPA.
Okay, thank you. Finally, I just have to note for the record, power up your business, Community College of Philadelphia, power up your business. We had a hearing here in council in which eConsult came to talk about the value of the investment, the return, and it wasn't sort of any, obviously an emotional argument, but they were able to literally quantify what investment in that program means to the city of Philadelphia and support for our small businesses. So can you all, for the record, talk about the administration's perspective relative to this program?
Yes, I think generally we think it's really been successful. It's kind of capitalized on the Goldman Sachs model, the 10,000 small businesses, and has really had a neighborhood focus and have businesses, small neighborhood businesses from the city, be able to participate in that program. We're excited to see it continue, along with the other investments we're making at community college, additional dual enrollment slots to get to Harold's point about increasing that 2- and 4-year degree attainment goal that we have. So all of that investment in community college we think is really, really vital to the overall economic health of the city.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council Lady. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Mr. President, we only have 7 minutes.
7, yes.
7 minutes. Well, you know, between politicians and pastors, it takes us 7 minutes just to say good morning. So I will be brief. Good morning.
Thank you, sir.
One of my concerns, and I've raised this in the past, is that we don't have the budget detail as we're going through this process, going to 5-year plan. For example, I know because of some of the changes in recycling in China, we're going to have 2 major contracts coming up this year, both the recycling contract and the municipal waste contract. But looking at page 79 of the FY 5-year plan breakdown, looks like you're budgeting about $6 million in more expenses, but we can't tell if that's for either recycling or municipal waste. So that's why it's really important going forward that we have the budget detail. Let me shift to some other questions that I have. Last year, we actually put in about $55 million for a federal funding reserve. Obviously, we did not have some of the concerns that we thought would occur under the current occupant of Pennsylvania Avenue. How were those dollars allocated?
Sorry, you're asking about how the federal funding reserve?
The federal funding reserve.
In FY18?
Right.
So we didn't end up needing to use any of that in FY18.
And so did I just go into the fund balance?
That's right, that fell to fund balance.
And is there a plan for a federal funding reserve for this year as well?
We have continued the federal funding reserve in this fiscal year and then throughout the 5-year plan.
Right, and so that's about 55 million, give or take?
Yeah, it's sort of 53 to 55 million each year. Yeah.
And that's in addition to this year, we're planning about 34 million for the rainy day fund.
That's right.
And last year and the year before, we did about 20 million.
So in FY19, we have proposed a $20 million contribution, even though it technically has to be included with part of the budget. So there's $20 million that we've assumed could go into a rainy day fund in FY19. And then per the charter, we're required to put $34 million into the rainy day fund in FY20.
Okay. And so over the course of the 5-year plan, what's the total amount you anticipate for the federal funding reserve?
So over the, I'll do that quick calculation, but so for the rainy day fund, it's 92 million.
Well, not the rainy day.
Not the rainy day fund, just the federal funding reserve.
Yes.
Well, it's approximately 55 million a year for the next 5 years.
Okay. Some other questions I have. Looks like on page 3 of the testimony, we talked about $10 million in savings from a reduction of the census in our prison population. Also, earlier in testimony, we talked about the mayor's $31.5 million crime prevention plan. What's the total amount of resources that will go to community-based organizations?
So are you talking about the amount that goes directly just to there's 3 different components within the Managing Director's office.
Specifically the grants that can go to community-based programs, but also in your testimony you talk about a $10 million savings from reduction of the census in our jails. So I'm trying to get a sense of, we're talking $10 million in savings, but I want to see how much is actually going to be going toward community-based organizations.
So over the community grants, we'll have about $1 million over the 5-year plan.
So about $1 million per year, or $1 million in total of the 5-year plan?
Over the 5-year plan.
Okay, $1 million, okay. And the savings for that census reduction, about $10 million, okay?
Yep.
Also on page 3 of the testimony, talked about the opioid crisis. Has the administration taken a position on safe injection sites?
So we've looked at the issue. Obviously, the managing director's offices went and done visits to Vancouver and looked at the sites. We were supportive of an outside entity if they were to set it up. Our focus as an administration has been trying to keep as many people alive for as long amount of time as possible. So we've spent a lot of time investigating it and think that one could be successful here in keeping people alive, yes.
Okay. On page 3 of the testimony, we talked about inclusive growth and talking about poverty, and you're also talking about some tax policy perspectives. What resources will be identified to really grow small businesses in our city?
So we can have the Commerce Director come back up and speak more specifically. So there's additional resources in the budget that goes to the stimulus fund for things like commercial corridor development. There are additional business loans that we're able to do through PIDC that would, again, support those businesses. But I'll have Harold come up and speak more specifically.
What's kind of the total amount that's been allocated by the administration?
The total amount you're looking for?
Sorry.
Again, Harold Epps, Director of Commerce. I can't speak to the total amount, but the typical programs that you all are familiar with around in-store, storefront, camera programs are there and will be modestly increased for next year. The quarter cleaning program is up a little. There is an additional loan fund that will encourage businesses that rent to be able to have the resources to buy the buildings that will be piloted next year. And I think there's one I'm missing, but we'll get that back to you.
And just to be, so we're adding an additional, we've added another additional $2.4 million to the stimulus funds in FY20 over 19.
Did you say stimulus funds? I thought that was
economic
a Latin
stimulus
term.
funding that goes to PIDC.
I thought stimulus funds was a Latin term. I really haven't heard it in a long time. So.
Well, it's a foreign term for sure.
Okay, 2.4 million this year?
That's how much we're adding to the amount that goes to PIDC that the Commerce Department uses for grants.
And that's going to be per year over 5 years?
So, so then that's just the amount that we're going for FY20.
Okay. Are there also resources going to be identified to the initiative coming out of the Amazon project, the Global Identity Project from the city?
That will be funded for next year. It's not funded for all 5 years, but it is funded for next year.
It's funded for next year, and that amount is?
$250,000.
Okay, and my understanding is that private sources are also going to be used for that initiative. Is there a way that we can leverage those dollars?
Well, that's our plan. We haven't finished the work, but that's part of the strategy.
I just said good morning. It can't be my time up yet.
Yeah, Councilman, your opening statement took up a significant amount.
Wait. That should be stricken for the record. Come on.
Well, one thing, you know what? The next time.
You're counting this against my time now.
Well, to better utilize the council person's time, and this might be a little thing that administrations do. If we could have like all of the, particularly the most frequent callers up to the table. Right. Sit closer to the table so they don't spend time walking across the room to get to the table and eating up the council person's time.
I was asking
so
questions.
She would probably line up like all the cabinet officials here and all the commissioners there. So
we're happy to do a seating chart for next year.
Yeah. So just trying to stay on television. That's all.
But the 7 minutes is up.
Okay. Well, I'll just close then with just one final question.
Please, sir.
Okay. On page 2, you talked about the school district and additional funding and believing that all funds should go through, not just new money, but all funds should go through the funding formula. Has there been any conversation with other jurisdictions, Norristown, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, other cities? Because my understanding is that the William Penn versus the Pennsylvania Department of Education lawsuit will be up before the Supreme Court very soon. Hopefully that decision will be rendered this year. But it has been conversations of the leadership of other cities trying to come together with a statewide coalition about the reason why we need a fair funding formula that does not just benefit Philadelphia, but really all cities and municipalities in the Commonwealth. And that's something that I've been advocating as Vice President of Pennsylvania Municipal League, but I'm curious if those conversations have started.
So we've definitely started that with our school district and then their partners they work with across the Commonwealth. I think a lot of people are waiting to see where things go with the Commonwealth Court trial and then eventually, I'm sure, arguments for the Supreme Court before we step too far down the line of what to do there. There are a lot of school districts that, removal of the hold harmless clause would negatively impact financially. So I think, growing the overall pie statewide is going to be key to solving that problem, as well as making sure that school districts, specifically on the eastern side of the Commonwealth, are receiving receiving their fair share. And Philadelphia, just because of our size, will benefit disproportionately more than everybody else with that. So we think there's incremental steps that can be made in the short term. Just increasing that amount of money that would flow through the new funding formula would significantly impact Philadelphia. So, we're advocating for that now. And as the court case works its way, again, through the appellate courts, we'll see about building that wider coalition, specifically on our side of the state, to try and drive that change in the General Assembly.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President, and good morning.
Good morning.
A few more minutes. I have a few comments and I have some questions. My questions are centered around the overall budget for now, but when I look back in the time I've been here to today, the budget's gone up about $855 million, as Council President Clark mentioned. It's a 21% increase in 4 years, which is a 5.25% increase per year. And what concerns me is that inflation over these 4 years was 5.32. So we're almost 4 times inflation. Also concerns me that under Mayor Michael Nutter during his 8 years, the total increase was 2.5% in 8 years, which is 0.3% per year. That's a huge increase in the budget. And it appears also that half the increase, just under half the increase, or $396 million, is employee compensation, which is about a 14% increase over 4 years, or 3.5% per year, again against inflation that's much lower. The debt service, fiscal year 17, was $140.9 million. Now it's projected to be $187.5, a 33% increase in paying off our debt, which is 8.25% increase per year. When I look at the chart of taxes, and we did a little research on this, when I started, the wage taxes were about 1.4. Today they're 1.67. It's about a $200 million increase in wage taxes, or 14% over 4 years. The real estate taxes, this is why I think people are feeling it, have gone up 21% in 4 years overall, real estate taxes, which is 125 million higher. The BERT taxes have gone up 60 million, or 14% over 4 years. And the realty transfer tax has gone up, as you mentioned earlier, 80 million, from 247 million to 327 million, a 32% increase over 4 years. One of my questions on the realty transfer tax, because we're going to have a debate, I assume, on the abatement, is if you could break down how much of the realty transfer tax is from abated properties versus unabated. Because as you said, Jim Engler, you guys did do a study, I think back in April or May of last year, that looked at 10 different variations of the abatement, and all 10 had a negative impact, some varying degrees. So I would just like to know of that increase, how much of those were abated properties. And then what depresses me is in the backdrop of all this increase, the poverty is still 400,000. The deep poverty has gone from 12 to 14%, or about 186,000 people to 215,000, almost 29,000 more people in deep poverty. And by the way, my understanding of deep poverty is the definition is $1,000 a month or less. Is that accurate for deep poverty?
I don't know the exact definition.
5,000 a year. So, I mean, we have 225,000 people in this city, you're saying, making less than $5,000 a year. So, I think in many ways, we need to put more focus on the ability of creating jobs, especially in our people that have poverty. And when I look at what I think the symptom is, the businesses that were here 30, 40 years ago, those jobs are gone. And we've never trained the population for the new economy. Just look 25 years ago. Ford Motor, GE, AT&T, General Motors, and what is it today? The Amazons, Google, it's mostly tech. So my question is, we saw the program that Councilwoman Parker had supported, which is the Power Up, which I thought was great. We saw the returns were 13% per year over 10 years. Why are we not investing more in job creation programs to take the people that are in poverty and deep poverty out? Why are we not addressing, for example, PHA, that has 32,000 people and 100,000 people on a wait list, and not equipping them with financial literacy and other skills to get them out of PHA? So my focus during this hearing is going to be mostly right now on how do we address that deep poverty and poverty issue.
Yeah, so thank you, Councilman. I think we've shown our commitment to try and attack that problem specifically through education. So a lot of the growth that you mentioned in our overall expenditures have been dedicated to education. We saw an education system that was starved for decades, and the administration, along with City Council over the last several years, has stepped up significantly. Through both our contribution to the school district, through the increase in resources of the school district from things like real estate taxes, as well as our focus on early childhood education and on community schools, directly providing supports to those people that are in poverty. You've also seen it through our investment in affordable housing. So last year we committed to the new revenue coming from the tax abatement to go directly to the Housing Trust Fund to support the housing action plans at the tune of $80 million. So all of that new revenue and all these new expenditures are meeting the needs of the population that we are trying to serve, in addition to making investments that we know were deferred for a long time. You mentioned how the budget during the 8 years of the Nutter administration only grew by about 3%.
2.5%.
3.5%.
2.5%.
Obviously, the budget also went through a significant contraction. Revenue significantly dropped during that same time period. So I think you're seeing growth now because we realized that we went through a long period where we couldn't make investments. I think if you talk to anybody who was in the Nutter administration, there was a deep desire to make investments in departments that they know needed it, and they couldn't do it because financially it wasn't going to be feasible. I've talked to Rob and Anna about their time during the Nutter administration and trying to get to a fund balance of about $10,000 because they knew that they needed to get to a positive fund balance in order to be able to present a balanced budget to council, and they had to get to that number. That's such a small number because the global economy had collapsed. So I think our focus has been, again, on making those long-term investments that we think will pay off decades into the future. And in programs like Power Up Your Business, I think it's really shown that when we make that investment up front, it'll pay dividends for a long time down the road.
But here's my two concerns. One, for the residents living in the city, with inflation at 1 to 1.5% per year the last 4 years, their real estate taxes went up on average 5.25%. This is an average. So they're feeling it, and that's pushing people, I think, over the edge. That's one piece. The second piece is education is extremely important. Everyone agrees. Nobody disagrees. But so is the opportunity for a really good job. And by the way, I'm totally in favor of raising the minimum wage, but when you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, you are still in poverty. What we need to... Okay. What we really need to focus on, and we'll talk about this another time, is that the entrepreneurship rates. The entrepreneurship rates in Philadelphia, according to Pew, 78.6% white-owned businesses, 10% Asian, 2.4% African-American. That's where we need to focus. We need to teach people how to own their own businesses and be owners. That's very important. Anyway, I'll come back to the next round.
Thank you, Councilman. Very good point. Shameless promo, narrowing the gap, City Council, This is the blueprint for dealing with that issue. Thank you, Councilman. Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President. For Jim Engler, if you could, I only have one question and no follow-up. I just would like to explain on behalf of the administration, if we have a third-party independent audit that has discredited the property assessments, and the assessments are higher than they've ever been, and we are now freezing the assessments and doing spot audits, how do we say to the people of Philadelphia that we are not going to refund you this money?
So just a couple points. One, we haven't frozen assessments. We're using a new valuation method called trending, which looks at the city and geographic zones. So we haven't frozen the assessment process. I think the administration, by and large, we think that the 2019 assessments that you referenced are, by and large, they are accurate. I think we've seen growth in the real estate market in Philadelphia. I think if you talk to experts, there has been significant growth in the real estate market. We saw about 9,000 appeals, 9,500 appeals to BRT out of 350,000 increases in assessments. So it's a small number. I think You know, we addressed the audit. Obviously, we worked with City Council on the results of the audit. We engaged with one of our consultants to develop recommendations on things that can be improved at OPA to try and improve both the way that we do things as well as the results. But I think by and large, looking at the system evaluation, the system of real estate valuation in the city now compared to where we were before AVI, it's a drastically improved system. If you look at the system now to when you came in the City Council several years ago, you would see a drastically improved system. Values are much closer to being accurate today than they were before. We're always going to lag in that system. We're never going to always catch up because the valuations are being made now for an assessment against the tax rate that'll not happen until next year. So we're always going to see lag in that system, but by and large, it is drastically improved from where it was. We will always make improvements. Rob mentioned the implementation of CAMA, which will happen in the next year, which will take us in really a leap forward in how we can do the assessments. But I think, by and large, we stand by the accurateness of the assessments that you mentioned.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Gimm.
Thank you very much, Council President. I was wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about how you see school funding over the next 5 years. When we met with the CFO, he had a line that, the district's 5-year trajectory talked about, and I'm just quoting from the CFO, continued increases in special education and charter costs, coupled with new city actions around property assessments, the tolling of taxes that are due to the school district, and other proposed reductions in city funding, as well as new unfunded mandates from the city, will strain the ability of the district to achieve structural balance. So have you had a conversation with the school district about what they see the 5-year plan looking like, and are you both in sync about how you're seeing school district funding?
We are. We talk to the district regularly, including with the CFO. As you know, last year we made a commitment to significant increases in funding for the district. That shows with the $1.2 billion that's in our 5-year plan for the district, which is $700 million more than if we had not made the changes we made last year. I think what the CFO was talking about was risks that might hit those numbers around the edges. So one of the things you talked about specifically was the tolling legislation, which has an impact on when the district will receive revenue. And that obviously has an impact on them, but it doesn't undo all the large increases that we have in our 5-year plan.
Right. So I think we can generally agree that the school district funding is increasing. The question is that in terms of, we made a pretty strong commitment to at least, we were hoping for 5 years of financial stability. We probably will hit 3. Is it your understanding, consistent with the school district, that that they will stay at a stabilized funding stream for the next 3 years?
Yep, and I think one of the other things that the district says is that they really focus on ensuring that the first 2 years are balanced, and that the rest of the plan kind of shows what the longer term projection looks like and helps kind of frame the conversation around longer term funding. And one of the issues that Jim talked about was the lawsuit over state funding and where that will wind up, and kind of seeing what happens with that before really understanding what state funding will look like long term, and that'll have a huge impact on their finances.
Yeah. You know as well as I do that lawsuits take a long time to work themselves through. But, consistent with some of my colleagues asking questions, it's very clear that the school district's budget indicates that its fastest growing expense is charter schools and charter school spending, which is relatively unpredictable and pretty much uncapped. But because of that, is the city and the school district and our state delegation uniform on the request to Harrisburg that they must prioritize a charter school reimbursement? Because in part, one of the complaints that I consistently hear from Harrisburg is that nobody is on the same page when it comes to what do they actually want from the city. The city may say one thing, the school district says another, state legislators are kind of in the dark about what we're all talking about. So is there given the fact that the school district has been clear that charter school costs are the #1 fastest growing cost to the school district, are we going to be consistent in going to Harrisburg about the charter school reimbursement, which at some point was $300 million a year and probably should be even higher given our expansion? So yes, like, are we consistent on that? And show me how you're going to publicly demonstrate that that is going to be a consistent message.
So it's good timing. We actually recently received a request from the chair of the delegation to both the administration and the school district to come up with a funding ask that would meet the adequacy goal that we all have to have that adequate level of education funding. So we're going to be working on that over the next several weeks to develop what that formula is. We've had those discussions with the school district. There are a number of proposals that are floating out there now when it comes to charter funding, whether that's reform of the special education funding formula, whether that's, to your point about charter reimbursement. I think there was actually a Republican senator that shared a co-sponsorship memo last week to reinstate the charter reimbursement line item. So I think that's something we're going to be focused on. Right now, we're focused on working with the delegation to really, to your point, to organize ourselves around a common set of principles, and we're going to be looking to work with City Council on that, so that way we are all completely aligned when we go to Harrisburg around the changes that we want to see to not just the funding structure, but the overall pot of money that's available.
Yeah, and I personally think that this is something that should unify council across funding, so charter school advocates and public school advocates are on the same page, that without the charter school reimbursement formula, it's going to be really hard for anyone to be able to guarantee the stability of the charter or the public school sector. So you will make sure that you communicate that clearly to City Council?
Yes, we just received it, I think about a week or two ago, so we're working on that now with the school district, with the CFO and with the superintendent to try and develop what that proposal will be. We'll discuss that with council, obviously, before we respond to the delegation's request and take it from there.
Okay. And then last year's budget investment of $605 million to the schools included a stream of $93 million through sequestration, which would collect additional revenue from tax delinquent property owners. So where are we in that process, and how can we ensure that we're going to meet that mark so that stable school funding can be met?
So I don't think we actually will meet that mark.
This year or 5 years
over
out?
5 years. And I think part of the reason we won't is that, you know, one of the council members earlier talked about the kind of success we've had with collections over time. The pool of delinquents for sequestration is just not that big to generate that amount of funding. But the funding that we talked about, that $1.2 billion that we're showing, that's appropriated and that's stable, and we will hit that mark.
And so how far off do you think we would be? So if it's $93 million promised through sequestration, how far, what are your projections right now?
We'll get back to you with that number.
All right. Let's see. I think that the other question that I have, do I still have time? Okay, great. I'm taking it. Great. The proposed 5-year plan.
Councilwoman, I was saying that you have no time left.
Oh, I have no time. Okay, I'll go back around. You hesitated, sir, and I'm going to take my time.
I was watching the clock as it was winding down. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson, actually. Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Council President. Just have some questions regarding the CLIP program and L&I. So I know under the mayor's roadway to Safer Neighborhoods, that program, there's funding in the amount of $6.3 million for license and inspection for cleaning and greening lots and using proven models to reduce crime, demolishing unsafe structures, and stabilizing vacant buildings. And so I want to know specifically, like, what is the strategy in that plan? I heard about the broken window theory, right? But what's the actual plan that's going to go into place when it comes to reducing violence, specifically when it comes to L&I? That's my first question. And then the second question is, whoever can speak about the budget regarding CLIP. And I'm a strong advocate in moving forward that I believe that every district council, every council district should have their own individual CLIP program to specifically deal with, again, the dumping in lots, the graffiti, and I know for a fact, just by calling Tom Conway just about every other day, I know for a fact that they're spread thin because, again, this wasn't initially started as a citywide program. This is, for the record, a Northeast program, but nevertheless, they will come out in different parts of the city, but their primary purpose is not, you know, every neighborhood throughout the city of Philadelphia. They will come, but I have been told sometimes they doing stuff for the school district, so they can't come down to Point Breeze and do X, Y, Z. So I began looking, and I actually called hearings for this, but I said, let me wait until we do the budget process. How can we have a CLIP program in each individual council district? And then the other part of this question is the strategy regarding violence prevention and how we're going to use this $6.3 million.
Okay, good morning, Councilman. Dave Perry, Commissioner of Licenses and Inspections. Specifically, in terms of the budget increase for blight removal for LNI in the 5-year plan, what we're proposing to do, it goes along the lines of a study which was recently done by the University of Pennsylvania and Columbia University, in which there's a correlation between cleaning and greening of vacant lots and a reduction in crime. So we put a proposal together to go into the highest crime areas of Philadelphia and looking at all the vacant lots that are in that area, doing a cleaning and greening of those lots, in which we would remove all the debris that's there. We'd put up a wooden fence like you see that Pennsylvania Horticultural Society does, and then have regular maintenance, mowing of the lawn, cleaning of those lots on a go-forward basis. So that's one part of it.
Regular maintenance by who? Will ex-offenders be doing this work, or this just same LNI workers?
Now, what we're doing with that funding is we're actually going to transfer it over to CLIP, and CLIP will be hiring folks, we're hoping from the affected areas to actually help with the cleaning and greening.
So the LNI money is going to CLIP, correct?
A piece of it's going to CLIP, right? There's really three main parts to this. A piece of it goes to CLIP for cleaning and greening and maintaining the lots. A piece of it is going to LNI so that we can hire a third clean and seal crew. And clean and seal is one of the services that we provide that is extremely important and is in high demand by the neighborhoods. So we want to go into these high crime areas and make sure that we clean and seal every single vacant and open property that's in that particular district. The third part of this is additional demolition funds so that we can take down all the imminently dangerous buildings also in the highest crime areas. So we've identified some of the highest crime areas of the city, and we will go in order from the highest crime area to the next, and hope to do a soup to nuts blight removal program. Now, the studies that are out there, the academic studies, show that you can have up to a 25% absolute reduction in violent crime in areas in which you do blight removal. And it's not just you're chasing the crime into another area, it's an absolute decrease without impacts on the surrounding areas.
Will this include, and I'm just talking about what my constituents tell me in Eastwick, will this take in consideration, I guess, some coordination with streets regarding lighting, right? Some areas of Eastwick is very, very dark, so we get complaints about lighting. And also, a real big issue is alleyways. I mean, some of these alleyways are atrocious throughout the city of Philadelphia, and somehow we have a policy that says that we can't clean these alleyways, but nevertheless, if we're talking about crime prevention, right? A lot of these guys hustle, they sell drugs, they escape through the alleyways, they hide their drugs in the alleyways, and God forbid, from a public safety standpoint, that when there's a fire in someone's home and they can't get out the front, but they try to go out the back, and if something happens, and again, the question is always, what could the city have done to prevent this type of incident from happening? So have that been taken in consideration?
Well, in terms of what we're trying to do with violence reduction and blight removal, a key component is exactly what you said, Councilman. It's coordination amongst multiple departments. So we have a weekly phone call that we talk to other departments and try to coordinate our various efforts. We are focused on the operation pinpoint areas. This, it's citywide, but it's very focused on where the high crime is occurring. And we are trying to coordinate with streets. We're coordinating with Parks and Rec, who do the street tree type work, and with other agencies, so that when the city goes in there, we can have a visible impact on what the neighborhood looks like, and improve the environment in which the folks living there are experiencing.
Just wrapping up, because I'm on the clock. Clip. Can we get a clip? How can we get a clip program in every council district?
Good morning, Joanna Otero Cruz, Deputy Managing Director of Community Services. While we do not have a clip designated for each office, as you indicated, we are citywide, and we are utilizing much more data to work with our council partners and ensuring that all of the requests that come in through 311 are coordinated through all of our operational departments, including the work that you're hearing with L&I, specifically around the doors and windows, which is to eradicate some of the blight in the neighborhoods, and lot abatement. In addition to that, we did do also some alley clearing last year. While that is restricted in terms of how many we can do a year, that is something that we do, again, utilizing the data that comes in strategically in terms of what could be cleared.
All right, I just want to wrap up because I'm running out of time. Just one last point is, one, hopefully in the future we'll utilize the Future Track program, where you hire these ex-offenders to come out and clean the alleyways, and then streets came up and kind of replaced the lights. I think that was excellent, and it should be a part of the violence prevention strategy.
We do utilize, we have actually 36% of staffing are returning citizens for CLIP, and that is something that we pride ourselves to continue to enhance. In addition to that, we also, through our community service projects, utilize individuals to do their community service hours who are returning citizens.
Okay. And just for the record, I just want to thank Mr. Dave Perry and his team for working with us in Southwest Philadelphia, and with the Philadelphia Police Department and Nuisance Task Force. We were able to take hundreds of abandoned cars off the street, shut down a couple auto body shops, chop shops in Southwest Philadelphia. So I just want to thank you just for the record, coming out to the community, engaging in the community, engaging with the community, as we stay on top of trying to improve the quality of life of Southwest Philadelphia. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Councilman Martin. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Council President, for your latitude, sir.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
It did,
right?
yeah.
That's right. I was going to wear my pink tie today, too. But in any case, I'll grind a little more, obviously, in the department budgets, when they appear. And this is, just it's simply an introduction to the operating budget. So I'm not going to get into too much details. I, for one, do want to state for the record to my colleague, Councilman Johnson, that CLIP does an incredible job. All right, I'm glad they were born and raised in Northeast Philly. All right, but it was time appropriate. It was time appropriate when it was created, and I think has served a model, for the entire city of Philadelphia, which leads me to why we need to, take a look at it through this budget process and increase, potentially, take a look at increasing its equipment and services when it comes to teams. We have an increase of over $200 million in revenue, which I think is great, from our wage taxes. So I think our economy is in a very good place, and hopefully we can continue to fight for individual districts and the city for the services. One of my concerns and with our Commissioner Perry, our L&I Commissioner, who was just here, is, over the years, and this goes with any department, over the years, and this is basically kind of, taking the administration's back when it comes to the position we are in. The school district, I'll use an example. School district for years has rubber stamped everything. Now here we are paying for the sins of the past, right? And we're moving in the right direction when it comes to the school district. And this is something I think maybe over the past 5 years or even 7 years when in 2012 when I first got here, it was starting to correct itself under the administration, and especially with this administration having a local ed board. But when we go through tough times and we cut personnel, it's hard to make that up. And I think that's where we're at, but we are economically in a very good spot right now, and I'm pleased for that. So I'm going to continue to fight for the district, for some of the services that were lost in the past, the equipment to help effectuate a lot of those services and execute them for the quality of life and safety measures of all our communities. And one of the things that is going to be in my conversation throughout this budget process is the tens of millions of dollars that are left on the table that are not being collected from the underground economy. Now, we can dispute what that means, not you, but we can have that public conversation. But it is similar to the delinquent taxes that are out there that are perceived to not being collected, because we've done an incredible job with moving the needle on getting to 97% or near 90% in collecting our delinquent taxes. And I think the next thing is the illegal underground economy, and making sure that we take a very good snapshot of where we are, where we think we are, and where we actually are. And I know there's been an investment from the administration to deal with this underground economy. I think we can do more. I know we can do more. I think the rate of return is incredible. There's an incredible amount of return on the investment, just like we did with the delinquent taxes when we're putting in, tens of millions of dollars in our delinquent tax efforts. They've actually, we've seen tangible results, which is, I think, all we're looking for. And then we can deal with getting more L&I inspectors that are out on the street, not just 10. I introduced a bill, I know it's a ridiculous amount of 800, all right, but we got to start somewhere, all right, and that's how I play cards. But we have, conditions on our streets. We want to get to 131 miles of our streets repaving and potholes fixed, all right, but we need the equipment to go with it. We need to make sure that our trees, all right, that are coming down when I think every piece of ground that's not being built on is saturated with these 100-year storms and rains that we have, and trees are falling all over the place. And I just think there's a great opportunity to publicly have this conversation to move the needle, like we have been with our taxes and some of the efforts in reducing our wage tax and collecting our delinquency. So that is going to be some of my priorities moving into this budget season, and look forward to the public dialogue and continuing to move the needle, because we are delinquent, and we see it and we talk about it at our community meetings all the time. We are doing better with our delinquent taxes. We are doing better with our services. But after decades of cutbacks and cutbacks and cutbacks, it's time to give back and put back into place some of the the more efficient programs that we can put in place to help serve our constituents. So, I appreciate, as always, the start of the budget process, and look forward to its end.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Just a few follow-up questions to some of the things I asked about, and also that are included in your testimony. On page 3 of your testimony, talk about Operation Pinpoint. How does that compare or contrast with the Focused Deterrence Program?
So I think we'll have some folks in the Managing Director's office and from the Police Commissioner to come up.
You're putting a pause on my clock? Thanks, Bob.
We'll work this out in the seating chart for next year.
Rich Ross, Police Commissioner. So you wanted to know what distinguishes focused deterrence
Yeah,
from
just the difference
pinpoint?
between the two.
So focused deterrence primarily deals with people who are on probation, working in collaboration with the district attorney's office, dealing with what they call call-ins, where you basically call in a group of folks who are dealing with that. Pinpoint really kind of expands beyond that, where people we deal with don't necessarily have to be on probation. Some of our troubled individuals are not on probation, which doesn't allow them to fall under the category of focused deterrence anyway. So we're doing things that are similar in the sense that knocking on doors of people who our intelligence tells us either are likely to be targets or are likely to be shooters, trying to get the attention of particularly some of the young men on the periphery of this violence. But Pinpoint also deals to a great degree with analytics and trying to use data that we'll be getting from InfoShare and some other places that'll help us get in front of a lot of this stuff. You'll find that in a lot of these large cities, they're dealing with multi-million-dollar programs. So we're going to be doing something that doesn't cost quite as much, but we believe the analytics will help us immensely.
Okay, thank you. On page 2, testimony, talk about hiring additional firefighters and paramedics. My understanding, we have a pretty significant shortage of paramedics, and we have a significant need to the point that we're actually using firefighters as paramedics. How many paramedics do you anticipate hiring this year?
We can get back to you with the exact amount of paramedics. Just to correct that, firefighters aren't serving as paramedics. Firefighters do serve as in the EMS system, but they don't serve as paramedics. We hire specific paramedics, but I'm sure the Managing Director can talk in more detail.
Well, Brian Abernathy,
some would
Managing
dispute
Director.
that, but okay.
There's a paramedic crisis across the country, not just in Philadelphia. And the Fire Commissioner apologizes for not being here. He, at least last I spoke to him, was currently on the scene of a civilian fire death. Was working through Chestnut Hill Hospital to upgrade their EMTs to paramedics, as well as working with other members of the healthcare system to try to continue to expand the number of paramedics that we're able to bring into our system. The honest answer is we're going to bring in as many paramedics as we possibly can, and we probably still won't be at full strength.
Okay. A few other quick questions. In last year's testimony regarding the 5-year plan, talked about performance-based budgeting, and I was looking at my notes of testimony from you, Ms. Adams, and you talked about doing this on a quarterly basis. What's the status of performance-based budgeting for this year's budget and 5-year plan?
So through this year's budget, we will have 43 departments participating. We think we have about 10 more to go, which we will do next year for the FY21 budget. We will have all city departments as part of program-based budgeting. So with that, you'll see that as you get the budget detail, you'll see all the new departments are participating, their performance metrics. All of their metrics are also included in the 5-year plan, so you can see that for the departments and by program. And you can see also the investments and the revenues associated with them.
Okay. Also, as you know, PICA will be technically going out of business in the coming years. Want to get your thoughts. I actually have a resolution for hearings on PICA. I've been having conversations with their leadership. Curious if there's been any perspective on PICA, especially in the out years of the 5-year plan.
So we think PICA plays a crucial function, and we would actually like to see it extended beyond the end of its term. And, we will work with the state legislature to try to make that happen.
Have you started to think about any type of plan, or at least started a conversation with the Philadelphia delegation regarding the expiration of PICA?
So we've started those discussions internally and also with some staff at PICA. We haven't taken it to the legislature yet. We want to try and build out a more full proposal. We'll obviously talk to council about that as we move it forward. The last debt payment, I think, Rob, is in FY23. Yep. So we have a couple years in order to finalize that. But I think to Rob's point, we are very interested in maintaining PICA as an authority. It's something that the rating agencies look on favorably, and it gives us kind of another set of eyes on our budget to make sure that the assumptions that the administration is making are accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Gimm, please.
Thank you very much. In 2017, City Council worked with the city to establish the first legal defense fund for renters who face eviction. I think we had a recent story last week that talked about how renters are deeply impacted by speculation, rapidly rising costs, and other things. Last year, we were able to expand it to include 800, to grow it to about $850,000 a year. Moving closer to recognizing what its impact would look like. Not only does it provide a lawyer for a day, an increased long helpline, it diverts individuals into services and supports for, to get counseling, to get, opportunities to find other placement. It doesn't mean that, someone has to stay in that place forever. It just means that we're trying to work through something so we don't overburden the city on the consequences and costs that eviction leave us with. But I noticed that your 5-year plan brings, and I should say that because of the wide-ranging work that we've done, thanks to Eva Gladstein and her team, in combination with a number of different city agencies, the expansiveness of the project allowed for a big awareness campaign to happen that resulted in changes at the courts, including new regulations that require landlords to hold valid licenses and to be clear of any kinds of violations. And as a result, my understanding is that in the 2 short years that we've been able to have this funding go through to do a wide-ranging education campaign, eviction filings in our Philadelphia courts have actually dropped by 20%. 22,000 down to 18,000 is my understanding. Folks in this room who don't know, but eviction filings overwhelmingly target Black women. 70% of those who are filed against are Black women. So this was a very important issue for mothers, single heads of household, and communities who are very vulnerable in this crisis. So I am completely baffled as to why the administration is reducing that investment down to $2.5 million over the next 5 years, holding it to $500,000 when there's every single indication that it's, 1, been extraordinarily successful, 2, impacts a lot of communities that we're trying to outreach to, stabilizes families, especially children who have to switch schools every time they switch a home, and that, we shouldn't play this dance. We should actually be seeing a 5-year trajectory in which we're moving towards a right to counsel and expanded type of investment, so we're making it guarantees and assurances rather than leaving families, our legal community, and city agencies kind of hanging in the balance.
Councilwoman, I can't speak directly to the amount of funding other than to say that I know that we're balancing a lot of really tough priorities.
Eva, just put your name on the record.
Sorry,
please.
Eva Gladstein, Deputy Managing Director for Health and Human Services. We concur that it's important to support this work, and I'm very pleased to see that it's in the 5-year plan for 5 years, which had not occurred last year. And to support a range of activities, not just legal counsel, but the other activities that we've supported, including the hotline, including the website, including financial counseling for those residents, and more public education. So I'm sure there'll be a conversation between council and the administration during the budget process where this could be discussed more.
Okay. So I want to know whether the administration is committed to expanding this work over the next 5 years, not holding us even, not kind of being in the world of, but have you thought about a 5-year plan? Because this work is pretty serious. It takes a lot of time and energy. The eviction task force pulled a lot of different agencies together. It is ultimately going to have to be kind of, people have to grow to something. They have to evolve. They've got to know where the city's going. If the city is sort of going to hold even and we're going to play this game every single year, it's sort of hard for our legal community and for other entities, including our housing advocates and other financial counseling elements, to decide whether they're going to be partners with us. But what I'm asking is, do you see a future for us to grow this pool so that we're actually expanding these services and not just holding to them for 5 years, especially given the recent studies that show 50% of our city is now renters. We are facing an eviction crisis. It's national, clearly, but it hits home here in the poorest large city in the country. But what's your trajectory for the next 5 years? Because it's got to be more than us playing like a will we or won't we kind of thing every budget session.
Yeah, so I think to Eva's point, we are trying to balance a number of priorities. We've had this discussion a couple times about this specific funding, and we're going to continue to do that throughout this budget process. I think, you have our commitment to this dollar figure, which to Eva's point again was not in the 5-year plan last year, and kind of as we build it out and see the success of the work, we're going to have additional discussions throughout this budget process about what the right number is, not just this year, but throughout the length of the plan. So you have our commitment to continue to work with you on that. I can't commit to a dollar figure right now. But we're obviously committed to working with you and the other members as to what the right amount is for the program for this year and into the future.
If I could just add, planning and development is also engaged in this conversation and looking at additional supports for renters from existing resources. For example, our housing counseling agencies, our NACs, et cetera. I can't speak for them, but this has been a more holistic approach in terms of looking at, housing trust fund resources that can be used for prevention and diversion as well. And so we're trying to coordinate across different parts of government.
And I can't underscore how much I appreciate the work that our city agencies have done. I just want to make sure that the administration is very consistent, that this is a commitment over the next 5 years to grow towards a model where we're actually providing, an expansive approach towards the eviction crisis rather than a hold steady kind of approach as this crisis grows. But to be continued, and I want to thank all of our city agencies that have done tremendous work on this issue. Very similarly, do I have time? All right, I'm taking
30 seconds.
I'm not asking, don't answer.
30 seconds.
So my other question is, similar to this, could you talk a little bit, obviously school construction is an urgent issue, school modernization is an urgent issue in our city. Have you, is there, it's hard, obviously, within both the capital budget and also the school district. We have rebuild, we have other types of things. But in what ways are you exploring how the city is partnering with the school district to support them on an expanded effort for a 21st century school modernization and construction plan, which I think is one of the biggest efforts that we can do to anchor the new families who are coming into our city, to assure residents that who are already here that the buildings that they are around are safe and not even just safe and okay, but actually really lovely testaments to the city's care and keeping for public education and our youth.
Thank you. So I think I would try and answer that in two parts. One, in the immediate future, we really want to make sure that every school is safe. So we want to work on areas of lead and asbestos abatement, things that have been priorities for council, and making sure that every school is a safe space for kids to be in today. When it comes to the schools of the future, we are in discussions with the school district as well as some outside folks on different ways that we can finance those projects, whether it's things like PlanCon at the state level. The school district's capital budget is about $1 billion over their 5-year plan, so it is significant. We also, I think one of the benefits of local control from our perspective is that it's allowed us to more closely coordinate with the school district on a range of issues. We have quarterly meetings with senior school district staff on strategic initiatives, things that we're working on, whether it's the Office of Career Connectedness, the asthma initiative that the health department is working on to try and increase attendance and reduce asthma rates in schools. And we're doing that on the operational side as well. So the Resilience Project, as an example, has allowed us to work more closely with the school district to better design safe routes to schools in the Kensington neighborhood, as well as make sure that those schoolyards are clean and free of needles and debris. So I think that's allowed us to get closer together. We're standing up that operational group now where we will be I think over the next several months, be working towards a similar project to what we've seen with Rebuild, to really analyze the school district's assets, analyze it against the assets that we have, analyze it against feeder patterns and population patterns throughout the city to make sure that we are making the smartest and best investments that we can from not only the school district's capital budget, but from other resources that we can put together towards that effort.
And very briefly, just want to put on the record that another area that the city could be helpful with is having negotiations with PECO about upgrading the electrical grids that power our schools that allow for like air conditioning, temperature temperature controls, it would benefit the city beyond just the school system that's there. But, you know, there were kids who passed out, teachers who went to the emergency room when we opened schools in August, and everybody in the state is tested in April at the same time. There's no reason why our kids' learning should be delayed because they're held hostage by the weather and these terrible school buildings. But to the extent that the city can be in conversations with PICO about what it costs to upgrade the electrical power grids, that would be an extremely helpful area too.
We're happy to be part of those conversations. One of the other areas of focus for that operations group is around energy purchasing as well. So how can we reduce the cost of energy purchasing, which will allow us to make additional investments in our infrastructure. So there's another area of focus.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple more questions. Beginning in fiscal year 18, our fund balance surplus was projected to be $189 million. However, we had additional surpluses of $179. Any reason why our projections were so far off?
So part of what happened is that the economy continued to be strong, and you know, economists for multiple years now have been saying this expansion is about to come to an end. We build that into our projections, and you know, you can see it in this year's projections. We assume that the economy starts to slow. If it doesn't, then you know, our fund balances will be larger than what we have in the plan. If it does, they'll look like what we have in the plan.
Another question. The fiscal year 18 CAFR has been posted and is missing a vital piece. This type of audit is required to follow two sets of professional standards, which requires the auditor submit a yellow book report to those charged with governance. Can you provide council with the yellow book report?
You're saying the auditor is required to do that, so the city controller is? Yeah, we can ask them for that document.
The yellow book report, yeah. Thank you. Those are the easy ones. Now, I want to just mention, I want to go back to last year, because last year at this time, I questioned the $33 million on the CAFR report that was unaccounted for, and the 7 city accounts not reconciled, totaling actually over $113 billion. But this council passed a reconciliation bill supported by all, requiring the administration to provide us with monthly reports and all accounts reconciled and those not reconciled. The good news is that, and you can verify this, as of today, the $33 million is down to $500 million roughly?
No, to 520,000.
520,000, that's right, yeah, 520,000, yeah. Little slip.
That was the worst moment in this hearing.
Down to 520,000, and that's great news. So I want to thank everyone involved who had participated in that. I know there's a lot of people, the treasurer, Rob, the reconciliation task force. I think you did a good job, and it was going down. Hopefully we'll find the rest of it. And the bigger piece also that I want to make sure that we're on the record is that, to my understanding, all the accounts now are reconciled.
That is correct.
So we should just put that to bed. That's great news. So going forward, what did we put in place to prevent this from happening again?
Sure. So we are writing up policies and procedures to make sure that everyone sees what they are. We have cross-trained employees in the city treasurer's office so that if someone leaves, there'll still be people there who knows what they're doing. We've brought in a new deputy city treasurer to oversee those operations. And we've increased staff in the treasurer's office. So all those things together will make sure that we stay up to date in our reconciliations and that we don't have the kind of variance that happened over the years.
And is your department getting a monthly report to track this?
We get regular reports. Actually, we get more than monthly reports.
Right.
The monthly reports are put up on the website and are submitted to council.
So in your opinion, we can put this to bed at this point?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let me switch to another category that was my favorite topic the last 2 years. You can guess what that might be. The prison system.
You have a lot of favorite topics.
This one's the prison system. So, we've seen a tremendous reduction, and I applaud the MacArthur Grant and all those who've been working on it. I know there's been a lot of people that have been involved, and the population over the last few years has gone from roughly 8,300 to 4,600, a 45% reduction. The budget 4 years ago, according to our records, was $391 million. The budget today looks like $385 million roughly. And I was told big savings would occur with the House of Corrections being closed. And my concern is that the population that has been reduced by 45% is great, but we haven't seen the budget actually been reduced even close to where that population's been reduced. The cost per person roughly 4 years ago, everybody's coming up now, huh? The cost per person was roughly $55,000. Now we're at $84,000. So it's costing us a lot more per person. I mean, can you imagine $84,000 to keep people on state road per person? There was an efficiency study that I had requested, and I think you all agreed to back in August of 2017, but we haven't seen that yet, so it hasn't been too efficient on getting us to study. But it was like 18 months ago, so I'm wondering when that study is going to come out. And also, I just want to, last year, I think we're looking at this whole prison thing wrong. And I'll give you two minor examples. Last year, the Free Library was here. I asked them what it would cost to teach financial literacy in the prison. They gave us a price. I supported the program. I went to the first graduation class in December. These people had 50 hours of financial literacy in the prison. It was pretty amazing, one of my best days being on council. And then last week, I supported another program by Sylvester Mobley, where we're teaching coding in the prison. We have 16 people enrolled, and it costs $35,000 for 16 people. It's peanuts, not even $2,200, $2,300. Well, my point is, I just want to shine a light on this. We should be investing those dollars into programs so when people come out, they're fully equipped, whether it's CTE or entrepreneurship, whatever it is. Considering we're paying over $80,000 per person, the investment in the education while they're there, not when they come out, while they're there, to me seems the way to go. So, and I also think it'll prevent recidivism. So my question and answer in this is, how do we get, by the way, I'm told that we're the first prison in Pennsylvania to teach coding, according to the governor, first in the state. So how do we do more of those programs, and how do we advance that whole agenda?
So the efficiency study is finished, and we would like to actually set up briefings for council to go through what's in there.
Okay, good.
Good morning, Blanche Carney, Commissioner for the Philadelphia Department of Prisons. Councilman Dom, thank you for your funding of those two initiatives for the coding program and the financial literacy. We will be working with council to schedule the briefing for the cost analysis for the department, and we look forward to briefing you about the update.
Okay. Do you think there's an opportunity, because I think this is the way to go, to have more of these courses there and more teaching to help people when they come out so they can have real jobs?
Yes, and that's why we partnered with you with those two initiatives. So we are exploring other opportunities to explore engagement for real robust employment post-release.
Well, let me just put on the record, and I'm going to give you the challenge because I mentioned this in December to everybody when I went to the graduation class. Any returning citizen who wants to take financial literacy courses in 19, I will pay for it. So if there's 1,000 coming out, I'll pay for all of them. Whatever it is, I will pay for it.
Thank you. And
so there's no funding issue. You just got to implement.
All right, okay, I'll work with you. Thank you for funding that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I'm trying to think of other programs for Councilman Dom to fund. He's got it. He's got it. But in all seriousness, I just want to thank the administration for the work around providing those programs in prison, for those who are incarcerated, because so often what we do is sort of this little catch and release thing, and that's not moving our city forward, that's not lifting us out of poverty, that's not getting anything done that we really need to do. So I'm really glad to hear about the additional programs that are being administered within the prisons. I just had a couple of questions, and I wanted to actually piggyback on Councilman Dom's first question about the fund balance and the sort of like the roller coaster ride that we see happening with the fund balance, and we've seen it for some time now. And I know, Rob, you mentioned, Mr. Dubois, you mentioned that it's really connected to the forecast of the economy and what is projected, but it just seems like this has been going on for quite some time. for I would say the last 5 years at least, that we've projected one thing and our fund balance has actually been significantly higher. And, you know, just looking at what we expect in the future, from a high of $227 million is projected in fiscal year 19 to a low of 97.6 by the end of fiscal year 22, and then rising again to 153 million by the end of fiscal year 24. So, you know, it feels like, again, like quite a roller coaster ride that we have every year, and it becomes hard to budget. If you didn't know what your paycheck was, just as an example, if we didn't know what our paycheck was week in and week out, it's very difficult to budget how you're going to pay your bills, how you're going to manage your funds, how you're going to save, how you're going to do anything. And likewise, it's a good thing to have a higher fund balance than projected, but that means that those are dollars that can go into services and programs that we want, like prison reform, like the streets department or the police department or L&I. Those are programs and departments that we want to see additional dollars go to because we hear it from our constituents. So how do we, you know, reconcile, if you will, the balances that are occurring, the increased balances that are occurring over what is projected, and how do we just have something closer in line with what is projected and what the actuality is at the end of the day?
So a couple of things. One, this year's plan is a little different from prior plans in that the projected fund balances are higher over the plan period. We made a commitment when we did the plan to keep those fund balances at least around 100 million. In earlier years, you would have seen balances that got much lower. Mm-hmm. It's also different in that we're showing contributions to rainy day fund.
Well, let me ask you, why is that? Is that just because you guys have noticed that you keep coming in significantly lower than what the actual balance is? Is that a result of what's been happening, or is there some other factor?
It was a result of when we made the trade-offs in the budget process to make a commitment to ensuring that the balance was at least around that amount. Mm-hmm. We also have contributions to the Budget Stabilization Reserve Fund, and that's a first. Our fund balances, even where they ended up FY18 at 368 million, they're way below where the Government Finance Officers Association said they should be. So they say that you should have a fund balance that's equal to about 2 months of your expenditures to provide a cushion.
Equal to about what?
About 2 months of expenditures.
2 months. Okay.
So that would be more than, or around double what our $368 million were. So even though we're coming in higher than what we project in the plan, we're not near where our industry standards are supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to kind of leave the impression that we have fund balances that are so large that we're missing out on investments we should be making. Mm-hmm. We still should be seeing fund balances at least where they were last year. So it's not, it's a good sign that our fund balances are higher in the plan. They're not where they should be.
Okay, well, I'm glad to see that we're trying to get closer in line with where they have been, what the actuality has been. But it just, again, it just feels very arbitrary. It doesn't feel like we're actually planning for the balances that we end up with, or right. It doesn't feel like there's like a strategy.
But the strategy is to ensure that, you know, we have fund balances that are high enough so that there's cushion and that we can continue to operate the government.
Sure.
We are the rating agencies, investors would all like to see them be higher. And so our strategy is to make sure that they don't go too low. We also are really careful if economists are saying that the economy is going to decline, to listen to that and to build that into our planning. And if they're wrong, which sometimes they are, that's good. And then, you know, we come in higher. What would be really bad is if they said, economy is going to slow down, and we said, you know, you've been wrong for the last 3 years, we're going to ignore that, and then they're right. Mm-hmm. And suddenly revenues are much lower than we expected, and during the middle of the year we have to make corrections to our budget. That's the worst case scenario for us.
And can I just also add, part of the way that when we look at all of our major taxes, we use an outside forecasting consultant called IHS Markit that helps us come up. They have a national model, a local model, where they look at kind of growth, the economic growth throughout our region. We have some taxes that are really susceptible to changes in the economy. And so our wage tax and our business tax and our real estate transfer tax really is very volatile. So during the recession in 2009, we quickly saw this massive decline in those three taxes, particularly our wage and our real estate transfer tax. And so, and we have with our business tax, we can have, one year we can have double-digit growth followed by double-digit declines. It's a very volatile tax because it's based on net profits. So we have to we go through a very complicated process with our outside economists, where we look at they have a model, they look at what we've been seeing over the last few years, then we vet that model and those growth rates with a group of economists at the Federal Reserve Bank held in a forum by PICA, and then PICA also looks at the reasonableness of our assumptions and to try and make sure that we are having reasonable growth rates in our revenues. Some years, like last year, where we actually hit that 8% target for the first time, when we managed to do that, we were also able, therefore, to make some investments that reduced our debt in the future years. We did some pay-as-you-go capital funding, so we could purchase more vehicles. We added some funding for neighborhood commercial corridors. So these are the because we've been able to build up these sort of fund balances, we've been able to do things that are much more fiscally responsible. We can avoid debt service. And so we always make those trade-offs. You mentioned the trade-offs of the first place of, we don't want to have so high of a cushion that we're not making immediate investments. Right. And we're conscious of that the whole time throughout the budget. But Philadelphia has been in such an unstable financial situation in the past that long-term investments are always risky. And so we are being really careful as the economy is doing well, that we're making investments that we can afford to make, because I was here during the recession in 2009, and making severe changes in department spending was really hard and really difficult for our residents. And we don't want to be in that situation again, so we have to build up a decent fund balance, not as high as the Government Finance Officers Association would recommend, but building up enough of a cushion that we provide financial stability across all of our services. So if we hit a recession again, we're not having to make another severe cutbacks in all department spending. We're not having to close fire stations. We're not having to do all these really severe things or raise taxes, because we'll have finally built some cushion into our budget.
Okay, and I get that, and nobody wants to see cuts, regardless of what the economy is doing. If things are, if we're in a recession and things are going poorly, cuts are hard because we're already a city that doesn't have the services that we need to have for our neighborhoods. So I certainly understand that, but I'm just thinking about, really the stability, and I understand that. We have not traditionally had the kind of financial planning that a city like Philadelphia really should have had in place. But I think we've come a long way. And now as we see these higher fund balances on a regular, recurring basis, that this is the time to, maybe think about how we're doing things and make sure that we're in the right places at all times. So do I have more time or no? That was just one question. I can keep going. Okay, thank you. Kenyatta doesn't mind. Can we talk briefly about the city and how we monitor contract performance? And I have before me a chart, and it lists Philadelphia's contracts as a percentage of total department spending for fiscal year 2019. And one of my concerns is that we contract out a lot. Now, I certainly recognize that in many departments, it's an absolute requirement. And probably in most departments, there's some contracting that's going to happen. My concern here really is the amount of contracts that really leave the city of Philadelphia and don't
when we make decisions in terms of who's receiving contracts, that women, people of color, people who are based in Philadelphia, it seems as if are often not at the forefront of receiving contracts. And if we're seriously talking about affecting poverty in the city of Philadelphia, I think that this is something that we have to really dive deeply into. We cannot think that we will build wealth here in the city and that we will do so while contracts that could support a business that pays taxes, that pays employees, that lifts folks out of poverty. We can't expect that it will happen if we are moving money outside of Philadelphia and to, Boston or, Chicago or California or Florida. And, I just recently had a conversation with a young woman who was telling me about a contract. She does business, all over the country. She has contracts in New York and New Jersey and Baltimore area and in Florida and here and there and everywhere. And for whatever reason, she has not been able to do work with the city of Philadelphia. And so I can't go into her specific case. Obviously, I don't have the facts. She was just telling me this in passing. But from some other knowledge I have, it does seem as if when it comes to contract spending in the city of Philadelphia, we do a lot of it. And we don't do a lot of it with people who live in Philadelphia, who are a minority, or who are women. So I was wondering if someone could speak to that.
Sure. So, Iola Harper, Office of Economic Opportunity. I can tell you that our office works every day to make sure that women and people of color and people with disabilities get access to opportunities. And you are right. There is a challenge. And oftentimes the challenge has to do with the businesses themselves, but more often it is the intricacies of city government that get in the way with contracting to women and minority-owned businesses. And so, go ahead.
What kind of issues?
Well, there are contracts that have, specialized contracts that say that they need specialized skill, as an example. So when those situations come about, we try to departmentalize that to figure out what's going on and move forward. That's one example of many different types of examples that are put forth. But we do work very hard to get minority and women in contracting positions. And our stats do reflect. I have Q2, FY Q2. For city, we are at 33.92% through Q2 for FY19, and that's for the city. Our goal is 35%, so we have a ways to go, but we are at 34% essentially.
Okay. I'd like to get some more information about what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Sure.
And I don't know if you recall, we had a conversation, I think it was like in the last budget cycle, and I'll refresh your memory offline if you like, but about a woman who was interested in doing a contract through, with the Philadelphia prison system. And she was a minority woman who was based here in Philadelphia, and the contract went to a vendor who was based in Baltimore, Maryland. And so we had some extensive conversation about that, and I still to this day don't understand how that could happen. I know we talked about it. We talked about it in public, we talked about it in my office, and to this day I'm still trying to understand how it is that this was someone who was supremely qualified and able to provide the services, and the contract went outside of the city limits to someone who's not paying, our city wage taxes and business privilege tax and all those sorts of things. So I would like to continue that conversation.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
I want to get an update on, and this is probably something I might need to say later on for planning, but it's questions around the land bank. And I would like for you just to clarify the recent executive order from the administration regarding land disposition. And really my questions just revolve around what their process is going to look like in the future. So give me an overview, give me an update on where we're at in that process.
Sure. So over the last several months, we've made a few significant changes. One is related to the disposition of properties through the VPRC process, or properties that are currently owned by the Department of Public Property. We went forth with additional deed restrictions on all of those deeds that say that the developer is going to have to be responsible for developing the property how they tell us they're going to develop it when they purchase it from the city. And if not, it gives us additional flexibility and authority to go and try and claw those properties back from the property owner. Last week, the Land Bank Board approved a memorandum of understanding between the Department of Public Property and the Land Bank that would allow the Department for VPRC properties to follow the same policies and regulations that the Land Bank follows for all dispositions. So if someone is buying a property that's owned by PRA or owned by the Land Bank or owned by VPRC, it'll follow the same process and the institution of a redevelopers agreement, a develop purchase agreement that would, again, hold the developer, hold the purchaser to certain standards that they have to comply with. The other thing that we said was that the default disposition policy, according to the disposition policies approved by Council in 2017, the default would be that we would go through some level of competitive process. So that properties would have to be listed for 30 days, that we would review them based off of a number of factors, not just price, but also community impact, and then eventually working with the district council member to determine what the best use of that property is. We did say that we would limit the use of direct sales to certain circumstances, something like a business expansion. The property is owned by a business owner adjacent, and they want to expand their business, then we can do a direct sale with that person. If it's going to be for affordable or workforce housing, we can do a direct sale. If it's going to be a community use, so if it's going to be a senior center or a pre-K center, we could do a direct sale in those circumstances. One of the key things that we wanted to change, though, was requiring that all of that information be posted publicly. So all the information related to that purchase, the developer's information, all of that be posted publicly, so the general public knows that if this property is being sold to this person, they meet those qualifications that we've set forward.
Will expressions of interest be publicly put online for the public to see? So all parties involved will know?
I'll have the director come up to speak to some of the specifics of it.
Hi, Ma'am Fadulin. I'm Director of Planning and Development. So we don't have plans to put every specific expression of interest online.
Why not?
Because there's thousands and thousands of them, and we don't, frankly, have a way that that would be meaning.
What happens when the developer says, I put expression of interest in, and I didn't get that property? Why?
Right.
I'm suing.
So that information will be up there. So just to clarify the expression of interest process. So one of the things that we've done is we've improved communication of what happens when someone puts an expression of interest in, and to clarify that that is exactly what it says. It's just interest in a property, it's not the application. So the information that's going out to people who put an expression,
so just for the record,
excuse me.
Just for the record, expression of interest doesn't mean you're entitled to that property.
Correct.
Okay, thank
Correct. So if it's an expression of interest for something that will qualify under the non-competitive sale, we will try to respond within 30 days. So side yard, community garden, something like that, that says, thank you, this would be the property application package, and they would be provided that application package. If it is for something that's like, going to be a competitive situation, then they will get a communication that says, thank you for expressing interest. As soon as this becomes available for competitive sale, we will notify you. And so then that whoever expresses will be notified. And as Jim Engler referenced, the information about who gets that property and what they're going to use it for, that kind of information will be put online.
And just last, how do you deal with, in terms of moving forward with the new policy, individuals who may have been approved they may have been approved 2 to 3 years ago or in the past, land value is higher now than it was when they were approved. How do you, moving forward, deal with that? Does the person, even though they were approved, and they started the process a while ago, and they were approved, do they pay current land value or the land value of when they were approved? Because that's where we see a lot of the, the papers say, oh, the council people are giving away land at a below market rate, when for the public, to all they hear, no council member, specific a district council, we don't assess land value. That's not what we do. We don't enforce deed restrictions. That's not what we do. According to the charter, we introduce legislation and move forward, right? So I look at this as vacant property review and the land bank responsibility, and whoever heads those departments, which would be yourself and for Doolin, how do we address that part where individuals are receiving value for less than what the market rate is based upon, I guess, the camera system and so forth. Explain that to me, how that works. Because I think this is going to always be a problem if we don't come up with an actual way to say, you know what, moving forward, here's going to be the bottom line, regardless if you got the land 1 year ago, if you got approved 1 year ago, 2 years ago, moving forward, everybody is going to be charged market rate value or not. Help me out.
Right. So what has happened, some of those properties that have had those issues have kind of been in between disposition policies, right? They were approved under 2014, and now it's today, and things have changed. So in the 2017 disposition policies, the one most recent, there is something in there that says an appraisal is good for 90 days. But we often know that sometimes people are stuck in the system not because of fault of their own, because of, let's say, other issues, right? And so we've tried to work with them to be fair, but I think as we move forward, we're going to try to clarify that about when the property value gets established, how long that price is good for, what happens after that time frame expires. Because again, similar to the EOI piece, I think a lot of the problems is we have not had clear communication about exactly what the process is, exactly when the price is set, exactly how long that price is. So those are things that we're working to clarify.
So will you have a time frame on those two particular issues, expressions of interest, EOIs, and also the property appraisal component?
Right. So the expression of interest, that communication has already been updated. We've had some, let's say, we've rolled it out. We've had a little bit of a glitch, so we're still working with Davenport, who's the entity that manages the website for us, to make sure that the correct information is going out. As far as the appraisal piece, like I said, right now, there's a 90-day window. Oftentimes, once you accept and you sign all the agreements, it takes longer than 90 days to get through VPRC, PRA board, council. So we're looking at that it's likely that it's going to end up being a 6-month piece, but that's something that we need to have a conversation with council, because council approves the disposition policies.
And what department will monitor, and I know we talked about, I think the law department having a role in this piece, and I sent the email back to Jim Engler about the enforcement regarding the flipping. Because again, the wider public, just based upon not knowing the process, would assume that a council person has knowledge if a person is going to flip or not. You don't really know. If they say they're going to do it for affordable housing, you go with them, saying they're going to do it affordable housing.
Right.
If they decide to flip, again, we don't do deed restrictions as council members. What department moving forward, right, under this new land disposition policy will monitor, and I know it's a lot of properties out there, but somehow certain ones come up out of nowhere to be reviewed. How are we going to be reviewing these transactions, specifically on enforcement, and making sure that when a person says they have a proposal to do affordable housing, right, the city of Philadelphia is going to follow up with you until you build that property, and making sure you're not actually flipping that property. And if they do flip, how do we go about taking back the property, or I guess charging them for not doing what they said they're going to do? When I say charging them, meaning what's the recourse of action for gypping the city of Philadelphia out of, dollars for getting land at a nominal value?
Right. So as again, Jim Engler alluded to, under the executive order, there's now going to be the deed restrictions in the deeds that are the VPRC property deeds that will
provide more protections in that way. The other thing, again, as Jim alluded to, is that there was an MOU signed with Department of Public Property and Philadelphia Land Bank that now properties that are transferred through the VPRC process will also be subject to the purchase and development agreement. So that is somewhat akin to the redevelopers agreement that comes out of the redevelopment authority, not exactly the same because there's a little bit slightly different guidelines or requirements. But in that, that's an agreement that gets recorded, its plans, its documents, and that really allows us the ability that if you don't do what you say you are going to do, that we have the ability to come in and take the property back. Who does that depends, frankly, on who was the landholding agency, right? So if it's a Department of Public Property, that's probably the city law department. If it's something that gets disposed of by the land bank, it's going to be the land bank attorney. And if it's disposed of by the redevelopment authority, it's the redevelopment authority. I mean, we're in the process of further consolidating that and making sure that those folks are working together. But basically, those legal rights are held within whichever entity has been the disposing entity.
One of the things we're able to do.
If I can interrupt, I want to make sure that we can move on and we can come back to any of this directive talk on land disposition, if it's okay with you.
Sure. If you don't mind, can Jim Engler just wrap up on his last statement, then we'll be done. If you can permit just a little latitude for him to wrap up, sir.
Sure.
Very important. One of the additional deed restrictions that we're able to apply is requiring not just notice, but approval through VPRC for deeds. If someone is going to transfer an interest in the property, it'll have to come back for approval from the Public Property Commissioner. So we'll have that additional level of authority. So they won't just have to notice us in some instances, they'll also have to come back and get a separate approval if they want to transfer an interest. And then we can apply those same standards that we would apply in the original sale to the new purchaser as well if they're interested in doing that.
Okay. I commend the administration on these efforts. I do want to say publicly for the record, I think the system is broken. A lot of times there's a lot of speculation and misinformation about the process because it's a very detailed process, and the wider public don't even know, but know how it operates. But I think this is the step in the right direction to kind of really streamline the process, and most importantly from an accountability standpoint, that we're addressing things the way it's supposed to be addressed in terms of land disposition. But most importantly, when people don't do what they say they're going to do, they're held accountable, but it's transparent where the public actually knows how this process actually works. Because again, I don't deal with deed restrictions and or assessing land value. So I'm in full support of your efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the latitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. Just have a couple of quick questions. I just want to go back to the prisons for a moment, just to tell you where I'm headed, so you don't have to bring up the commissioner. I'm just going to put it on the record. In my opinion, and we'll see the study, if we went from 8,300 to 4,600, 45% reduction, and if the budget with fringe benefits is close to $385 million, it seems to me we should be able to look at saving 15 to 20% on a 45% population reduction. And that's like serious money, 20%, $75 million a year. So we'll see where the study comes out, but I'm just giving you the facts. The other question I had is on delinquencies. I want to commend the Revenue Department, actually, for doing a good job, from what I can see. I don't know if Commissioner Breslin's here, but our fiscal year 17 delinquencies totaled $584 million, and today we're down to $483 million across the board, which is good. It's very good. We still have delinquent real estate taxes of $253 million, of which $158 million is principal versus interest and penalties. We have $397 million of water and sewer that at some point we should focus on. Last year when we started sequestration, I thought I was under the impression that of the delinquent real estate taxes, the potential pool for sequestration was about $100 million of investor-owned, tenant-occupied properties. And I would just like to know if that is accurate or inaccurate, and what we can do, if it is, to ramp up the sequestration, because I think it's a great program.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, one of the things that's happened is the pool of properties eligible for sequestration has shrunk, and we'll get specific numbers back to you on what that pool looks like and what we think realistic collections are, but it is less than what we talked about a year ago because of the success we've had in other areas in reducing delinquency.
But that tool of sequestration, could it be applied to some other areas of our delinquent taxes across the board, including bird taxes or collections or wage, any of those other taxes? Can we use that sequestration method in some other way, even with water and sewer? And for example, we have delinquent landlords in water and sewer who rent their properties. Why couldn't we adopt a sequestration program in water and sewer for delinquencies?
We can look into that, and we'll be ready to talk about that when revenue testifies.
Yeah, I think it's a great tool. That's all I'm bringing up.
Okay.
Anyway, last comment for what it's worth. I think there's a opportunity for us through the Commerce Department to create business ambassadors of goodwill for people that are opening businesses in the city or expanding current ones. And I think it should come through the Commerce Department, and we should empower them to be able to go to any department in the city to speed up whatever process they have to speed up in order to get a business opened up. I recently heard about a situation where it took a business owner 12 to 14 months to open a small restaurant to get through the city. And look, I can't even tell you how I would go through that process because I'm not even familiar with everything. I can only imagine that for the outside person, it's a daunting task. If we had the people in Commerce Department who were empowered, who could go to different departments and say, this is to open a business, we want that jobs, we want the revenue, we want to speed this up, I think it would help the process. And they live with them from the day they say I'm opening a business till they open the business.
So I've had these discussions with your staff as well, so I understand your interest in the program. One thing that we have been working on directly related to that single constituent instance is trying to align the Commerce Department, the Health Department, licensing and inspections to better streamline that process specifically around restaurant and food licensing. So that's an area I think you're going to see significant improvement in that time frame over the next several months as we launch that and finish that work. But I understand your desire in that. We're happy to work with you on that business ambassador idea.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your answers today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question, and that is around the funding and support for the roadmap to a safer Philadelphia violence reduction plan. And I wanted to know if we could talk about that a little bit over the next few years and the support that we're giving to that program, to other programs around violence reduction. I have some concern about the programs that already exist and the level of coordination between those programs, or it actually feels as if there is not the level of coordination that one would expect, and also in terms of the accountability or measurement for their effectiveness. You know, crime in our city is, it's a problem. It's a real problem, particularly young African-American men shooting other young African-American men. And, how are we getting in front of this? I know that there was the, what was the program? Focused Deterrence program, which I've advocated for, have talked about for some time now. I know that this was something that was a pilot program that the administration, I believe it was the administration, scrapped it, or was it the district attorney, or does somebody want to talk about that? But I think that that's something that was successful or had some level of success, and we scrapped that because it did not have a jobs component to it, which is what the mayor said, and I don't understand why we didn't just add what else was necessary. So I was wondering if you could talk about that and overall our strategy on this roadmap to a safer Philadelphia.
So I'll speak about focused deterrence. I can't really speak about the
okay.
Commissioner, can you state your name for the record,
I'm sorry, Rich Ross, Police Commissioner. So focused deterrence, as I said previously, deals primarily with people who are on probation.
Yes.
Right? All of our people and our offenders are not on probation. Mm-hmm. So it's not as expansive as you might think it is. It is not a catch-all. Mm-hmm. We used it in South Philadelphia for a reason, because in large part, we knew that the gangs were very structured. Mm-hmm. We knew who's always feuding with who. We are not against focused deterrence, as we are not against any other program. But I think what we have to caution against is the thinking that one program is the panacea, because it's not. In addition to which, as it relates to the administration cannot unilaterally employ focused deterrents. That's also, a partnership with the district attorney's office, and I've had a conversation with him. He asked me what my thoughts were, and I'm amenable to working with anything, provided we don't assume, one of the mistakes that is made is that, you throw up a magical program and that's the answer. That is not the answer. This is why you've got to have like a hodgepodge of things that you have to work with in order to reduce violent crime. And you are right. One of the failings, and David Kennedy himself, who's one of the architects of focused deterrence, will tell you that if you don't have the requisite services on the back end, you're essentially making focused deterrence all stick, no carrot. And at the end of the day, if you're asking some of these young men to participate, and they know they're only going to be in a program that's going to last a couple of weeks, and I'm, minimizing that just to make a point, that will not be the answer either. And so I guess in short, we are more than open to focused deterrence, provided that no one in the administration assumes that that's the catch-all, because it's not. That's just
well, no, I certainly don't think that there's like any one thing that's going to fix everything. And I also recognize that a lot of you said the program was for young men, I'll say, who were primarily young men who were familiar to the police department, who had been through the system, who were on probation or parole or had some interaction.
Right, they have to be under supervision.
Under supervision,
right.
Okay.
That's the bottom line. So you can't just indiscriminately do call-ins on people who are not.
And a lot of the victims, the shooting victims that we have, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, here in the city of Philadelphia, fit within that category.
Yeah, some of them do, but sadly, because of what we're dealing with this onslaught of the opioid crisis, which generates a whole different drug market, but we are dealing with social media beefs, which don't necessarily have to do with anything that's structured in terms of gangs, as well as just gang activity. So when you're dealing with a city that is the poorest big city in the country, with it comes some challenges, and so this is why we're willing to do as much as possible, including some unconventional things for law enforcement, which I will go into when you have our budget hearing. But the point being that there's no one solution, and so working with Vanessa Garrett Harley and Brian Abernathy and the rest of the city in an effort to try to have more of a holistic approach to dealing with this. Because here's the thing, for us, even in the police department, we recognize that we're doing what is tantamount to putting our fingers in the dikes in many cases to try to stem the tide of violence. What we want to do is have a more long-term impact on this mindset about people willing to use guns to deal with, short-term beefs that most people in this room would never even consider fighting over, let alone pulling out a gun over. And so having short-term reductions from one year to the next, ebbing and flowing, is not the goal. The goal is to long-term change the mindsets, improve the quality of life for people, making them feel like they have some hope, and they have opportunity, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to make it better. Moving that needle economically and other ways, that's what's going to have the long-term impact.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner?
So Vanessa Garrett Harley, Deputy Managing Director for Criminal Justice and Public Safety. To try to answer your question with regards to the Philadelphia Roadmap for Safer Communities, it is a comprehensive violence prevention and reduction strategy. Comprehensive being is really a 5-year long strategy, because it will take a significant period of time to move the needle to the place where we want it to be, given where we are. Now, having said that, it does contain within it both short-term as well as long-term action items. The short-term items are things that we believe we can accomplish this year, 2019. It is looking at the violence problem in the city from a public health approach, meaning that we're trying to do just what Commissioner Ross was alluding to, which is look at the root causes of what is causing the violent behavior. We have identified a targeted population for both the victims and the perpetrators, and they mirror each other. Predominantly, we're trying to look at some of the programs that, as you said, that we already have put money in, and to make sure that we are actually getting what we desire out of those programs as well, but also that to make sure that we have the right array of programs and that they target those higher risk individuals. The study is primarily focused on gun violence. basically as a result of the shooting and homicides numbers in the city that we're trying to reduce. So part of the strategy is to reevaluate and look at the existing programs, as well as to determine where there is a gap in programs that may need some program development.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And looks like Colombo. What, Councilman Dom. Just adding humor to a long afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there, are there any pieces of legislation that we have introduced recently or in the past in this body that would affect the 5-year plan?
Almost every piece of legislation affects the 5-year plan.
Like financially, though?
Sure. So, for example, you've asked for a fiscal impact statement for the amnesty bill. So we'll be looking at that to see what impact that has. Councilwoman Gim talked about the tolling bill. That had an impact on both us and the school district. So we had a hearing last week about the bill on the proposal to roll back assessments. That would have had an enormous impact on the 5-year plan. So, I mean, there really are almost every week bills that come up that have an impact on the 5-year plan.
One last comment, not about the 5-year plan, but about, I just want to make sure I understand, the tax credit that we provide employers for returning citizens, is it like $5,000, I believe?
Yes, but we also have a grant program, and we're trying to actually move that more towards the grant program.
And would it make economic sense, since it's costing us in the numbers now $84,000 per year per prisoner, to dramatically increase the incentive for employers to hire returning citizens to even $15,000 a year and pay it for 2 years, because the cost of bringing people back in is so much higher?
So we've had these discussions, obviously, with your office about how we can design the grant program. I think doing it through a grant allows us that additional flexibility. I think one of the sticking points that we've had is kind of the wage rate that we want people to be paid. I know there's been some back and forth. We've tried to peg it to at least the city's 21st century minimum wage standard to try and make sure that although individuals are working, they're also making what we determine to be a living wage. So we're going to continue to do that. We're obviously in the pilot phase for the first year, trying to figure out how the program design can be used and best utilized by the largest number of employers. One thing we've seen with the credit is that it's a very small subset of employers and businesses that have been able to access the credit. We want to make it a wider net to try and cast as many jobs as we can.
But I guess what my point is, I would be supportive of a wider cast of people supporting it and also a much bigger credit, considering our costs are so high annually. It's an investment in the future of these residents and people coming out that it makes economic sense to do a much bigger program.
Yeah, and we're going to continue talking to business owners and employers to determine what's the right number, what's the right number and mix for a program that makes sense. And then once we have found that, then we can scale it and determine how big we can do it within our existing budgetary constraints.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman, as always. Any other members? Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question for you. I understand there was some conversation about tax amnesty, which I have a great interest in. As you may be aware, we introduced a bill to give some relief to folks who are saddled with a very high interest and penalty for unresolved tax burdens here in the city of Philadelphia. It's quite routine that I have a constituent that may have a $5,000 or $10,000 principal balance, and the total balance due to the interest and penalties could be upwards of $20,000 to $30,000. And these aren't folks who have, a lot of money. These are folks who are struggling to make it, who didn't have the initial portion, but maybe had a business or real estate tax burden that they could not afford to pay, but have a willingness to pay. And so when I think about amnesty versus the abatement, I think of amnesty as having an ability to, an inability to pay the debt, but willingness to pay at least the principal balance, versus those with an abatement who have an ability to pay, but really an unwillingness to pay because of the policy that we have in place that is afforded to them. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your perspective on how we are going to collect these dollars that are outstanding. I don't see how amnesty is going to hurt the City of Philadelphia's coffers when those are dollars in revenue that aren't coming in otherwise. So that's who we are targeting when we talk about amnesty. We're reaching out and trying to help people get right with the city. We're trying to help them get their finances in order and to come out from that significant burden. And if they're able to get that in order, then hopefully they'll be able to financially get other things in order as well. And I think as a city, again, with the largest number of people in poverty in this nation, that's something that should certainly be afforded, particularly when we give away so much in terms of an abatement. We give away millions, and to say that this would have a negative effect on the city's coffers, I think is you know, in my opinion, a bit outrageous, and I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Sure. So a couple of things. First of all, you know, we share your concern for people who have problems making their payments, and that's why we've put in place a number of relief programs, including the UPR program, which actually allows people, depending on their level of income, to actually pay as little as zero, not even the principal, while they're trying to get their finances in place. So actually, for those people, the UPR would be a better deal than an amnesty program. For the amnesty...
Well, that's if you qualify.
That's right, but there are different levels of income.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, but amnesty would be available to anyone.
It would, and what happens with an amnesty, and what happened with the last amnesty, is while you get kind of an influx of revenue during this short period of the amnesty, leading up to the amnesty and after the amnesty, you see decreases in revenue. We actually saw over the 3-year period around the amnesty an $18 million reduction in our collections. We've been asked to do an impact study, fiscal impact study, and we'll do that, and we'll look at kind of what amnesties have meant, not just for us, but for other places, to see what impact they have on revenue. But the issue that they have is they do lead taxpayers to think, I can wait for the next amnesty, so I'm not going to pay. And that's the concern with an amnesty.
Yeah, I think that's an argument that really just, in my opinion, doesn't hold weight, because you don't know when the next amnesty, if there is an amnesty program, that's going to happen. There's no schedule of amnesty programs. There's no every 10 years the City of Philadelphia offers amnesty. You know, it just doesn't happen that way. And so every once in a while, if you can figure out what once in a while means on a calendar, you know, there's an amnesty program, but there is no way to say, well, I'm going to not pay my taxes for the next 10 years because in 10 years there's going to be an amnesty program. And so for those who are struggling, again, a lot of folks in our neighborhoods, the folks that we encounter every single day in our council offices who are really trying to get right with the city and want to do business with the city, want to do business with others, you know, are afraid of losing their lifetime investment, in many cases, their homes. These are folks who are Philadelphians, who have made an investment in Philadelphia, and who have a willingness to pay, but have traditionally had an inability to do so because of the high amounts of penalty and interest that are saddled with that debt. And so I think that is something that we have to look at. We have to do something about it, and that it is the least we can do is offer an amnesty program when we offer such a generous program with a 10-year tax abatement. It's the very least that we can do.
So we did have an amnesty in 2010. So we had one recently enough for people to remember and to think, okay, these things are coming along every once in a while. And kind of to the relief, to the point of people not being able to pay, the relief programs really do help, and we have really expanded them over the last several years, and I think they really do help people, and in many cases probably more than an amnesty would.
But once again, you have to qualify. There are certain requirements in terms of income limits and other requirements that may preclude some people, or may make some people ineligible to be able to participate. And an amnesty program basically would say, if you have the principal balance, you can come in and pay that.
An amnesty program would apply to everyone, including people who have no problem paying but just choose not to. Relief programs can be more targeted to people who actually, you know, have an issue.
Well, then it seems as if with a combination of an amnesty program and a relief program, then we can really put a dent in what's owed in the collections here in the city of Philadelphia, don't you think?
Well, we have, with just the relief programs and the strategies we're using, put a large dent in what's owed. We've gone up to over 96% property tax collected in the year they're due. We've shrunk the outstanding balance by hundreds of millions of dollars, so we have been making progress.
We've been making progress, but there's still about $250 million outstanding.
There's about $150 million in principal outstanding.
In principal,
And just,
right.
I think when this administration started, it was more like $270 million.
Mm-hmm.
So we have been making good progress in that area while offering relief programs to make sure that people who really need help can pay.
So, but if we're able to bring in $150 million into the city's coffers, I think that that would certainly be well worth it.
I would agree with you, but I mean, that's why we're going to do the fiscal impact statement to show what we think amnesty programs mean for finances.
Okay. I just think that what we do for one, we have to do for another. If we're going to be so generous with our abatement program, then we have to find some way to be supportive of folks who don't have the same resources, who are struggling, and who are losing their homes every day. And I think that that's sort of the contrasting argument, if you will, that we have on a regular basis, where you have folks who are losing their homes next door to, losing their homes for lack of paying real estate taxes next door to someone who has a 10-year tax abatement and who doesn't pay any real estate taxes. And so there is just a feeling of unfairness that comes with some of our tax policies, and we have to address these inequities.
I understand, and I guess the conversation is about the best way to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. That being no other council members or anybody else that is going to speak on the operation budget, I appreciate everybody coming in. Look forward to the next several months. There being none, this committee will stand at recess until Tuesday, March 26, 10 a.m.